kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind, because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing, and for a minute, it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly, they hear what you don't say, they look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know, and that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone, no fight, no goodbye that matches how close it felt, no ending that makes sense, just nothing, and that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone, so your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, yeah, next time don't say so much. Next time don't get attached. Next time stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking, not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere, a slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything. Because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does, so you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore, you hold back details, you soften your honesty, you keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them, and you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud, you just feel them, and slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness. You just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore, why being around people still feels lonely. It's because you didn't heal. You adapted. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you fully. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you. It just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same. But it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic. And the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet. To someone who avoids their own emotions, your honesty feels like pressure, your awareness feels like exposure, your care feels like responsibility. So they leave. Not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity, that's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming, I should have known better, I should have protected myself. But that's not growth, that's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting, you didn't mess up by being open, you didn't lose because you cared, you just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself, and slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudge their capacity? Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less, it's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky, not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it. You move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow-through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate, that's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed. And for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection, not constant intensity, just consistency. And that's how you know. because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept. And you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind. Because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing, and for a minute it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight, no goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense, just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run. Because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, next time, don't say so much. Next time, don't get attached. Next time, stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking. Not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere. A slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything, because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does. So you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore. You hold back details. You soften your honesty. You keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present. But there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them. And you hate that because you remember how it felt before. How natural it was to let someone know you. How easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud. You just feel them. And slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness, you just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore. Why being around people still feels lonely? It's because you didn't heal, you adapt. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you, it just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same, but it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic, and the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet, to someone who avoids their own emotions. Your honesty feels like pressure. Your awareness feels like exposure. Your care feels like responsibility. So they leave, not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity. That's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming. I should have known better. I should have protected myself. But that's not growth. That's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting. You didn't mess up by being open. You didn't lose because you cared. You just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself. And slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudged their capacity. Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less. It's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky. Not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it, so you move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear instead of communicate. That's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed, and for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection, not constant intensity, just consistency. And that's how you know. Because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept, and you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. I wasn't man enough, and I won't lie. That one stuck, not because I believe it, but because when someone you love questions your masculinity, it hits somewhere deeper than regular criticism. It's not just about behavior, it's identity. It's everything you thought you were doing right suddenly being reframed as weakness. What does man enough even mean? Because I showed up, I communicated, I stayed loyal, I tried to fix things instead of run from them. But apparently that wasn't enough. Apparently being calm instead of aggressive was a problem. Apparently wanting to talk things through instead of shutting down made me soft. Apparently expressing emotion made me less of a man. And that's when I realized something dangerous. Some people confuse masculinity with dominance. They confuse emotional control with emotional absence. They confuse stability with weakness. And if that's the definition she was using, then maybe I was never supposed to fit it. But still, when she said it, it made me question myself. Because no matter how confident you are, words like that linger. They make you replay moments. They make you wonder if you should have been tougher, colder, less available, less understanding. And that's how toxic standards start reshaping you quietly. I started analyzing everything after that. Was I too patient, too willing to compromise, too quick to apologize? Because I thought being a man meant being responsible, being accountable, being emotionally mature. But maybe she wanted something louder, more dominant, more unpredictable, and that's confusing because society tells men two opposite things. Be strong, but don't be cold. Be vulnerable, but don't be weak. Lead, but don't control. And somehow you're supposed to balance all of it perfectly. So when she said I wasn't man enough, I started wondering, was I too emotionally available? Was I too steady? Was I not exciting enough? But here's the truth that took me time to accept. Being consistent doesn't make you less of a man. Being calm doesn't make you less masculine. Being emotionally intelligent doesn't make you weak. It makes you evolved. And not everyone is comfortable with evolved. Some people are used to chaos, used to intensity, used to men who are hard to access emotionally. So when they meet someone who communicates clearly and stands firm without yelling, it feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel unmanly to someone who's been conditioned differently. But that's not my problem to fix. The deeper issue wasn't her words. It was what they tried to take from me. My confidence, because when someone attacks your masculinity, they're attacking your foundation. They're saying you're not enough as you are, and that's heavy. But here's what I had to learn. Being man enough means being emotionally unavailable. If it means suppressing how I feel, if it means pretending I don't care, if it it means dominating instead of communicating, then I don't want that version of masculinity, because strength isn't loud. It's controlled, it's stable, it's secure enough to not overreact. It's confident enough to not prove itself constantly. And maybe she mistook calm for weak. Maybe she mistook kindness for softness. Maybe she mistook emotional awareness for insecurity. But that doesn't redefine me, it just shows what she was used to. What hurt the most wasn't that she left, it was that she framed it like I lacked something, like I needed to become more, like I needed to step up into some undefined standard. But love isn't about becoming someone else to fit someone's idea of masculinity. It's about alignment. If she needed someone louder, more dominant, more emotionally distant, that's preference, not proof that I wasn't enough. Wasn't. Because being man enough shouldn't mean performing toughness. It should mean integrity, leadership, emotional control, responsibility. And I had all of that, just not in a way that matched her expectations, and that's okay. I realized something important after sitting with it. The right woman won't question your masculinity. She'll feel safe in it. She won't need you to be aggressive to feel protected. She won't need you to be emotionally shut down to feel secure. She won't test your dominance to measure your worth. She'll recognize strength and stability. She'll see leadership and accountability. She'll see masculinity in consistency, because real masculinity isn't about intimidation. It's about presence. It's about knowing who you are without needing to prove it constantly. And here's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes when someone says you're not man enough, what they really mean is you're not toxic enough for what I'm used to. Because chaos feels passionate to some people, silence feels strong to some people, emotional distance feels masculine to some people. But healthy masculinity feels boring if you're addicted to instability, and that's not an insult, it's reality. Some people equate unpredictability with strength, and when they meet steadiness, they don't know what to do with it. I had to ask myself something hard. Was I actually lacking, or was I just not performing? Because there's a difference. Lacking means I don't possess something. Performing means I'm pretending to, and I refuse to perform masculinity for approval. I refuse to become colder just to seem stronger. I refuse to suppress my emotional intelligence just to look dominant, because the right person won't require that. They'll appreciate it. If anything, being called not man enough forced me to define what that means for myself. To me, being a man means standing on your word, protecting without controlling, communicating without yelling, being emotionally disciplined, owning your mistakes, leading with stability, and I did all of that. So if that wasn't enough for her, it doesn't mean I failed. It means we defined strength differently. I won't let one person's perception reshape my identity, because masculinity isn't loud. It isn't about dominance. It isn't about intimidation. It's about internal control. It's about consistency. It's about knowing who you are when no one is watching. And if someone mistakes calm strength for weakness, that says more about what they're used to than what I am. She said I wasn't man enough, but I am man enough to walk away instead of yelling, stay calm instead of escalating, express how I feel instead of suppressing it, choose growth instead of ego. And that's the kind of man I'll stay, because the right woman won't need me to prove my masculinity. She'll feel secure in it, and I'd rather be steady and misunderstood than loud and respected for something I'm not. If being man enough means losing emotional depth, then I'll pass. Because real strength doesn't shout, it stands. No one really talks about how long some men are willing to wait for the one person they truly want. Not days, not weeks, months, sometimes years. And it usually starts with something small, something that doesn't sound final. She says, maybe one day. I'm just not ready right now. I need time. And he hears that like it's a promise, like it means not now doesn't mean never. So he holds on to those words, replays them, builds hope around them, and he waits. He doesn't make it obvious, he doesn't beg, he doesn't pressure. He waits quietly, patiently, convincing everyone, including himself, that he's fine. Because when a man sees you in his future, when he's already chosen you in his heart, waiting feels easier than letting go. He tells himself she's healing. She's figuring things out. She'll come back when she's ready. And sometimes it's hard to tell if that kind of waiting is beautiful or self-destructive, because love like that is rare. A man who's willing to pause his own needs, put his feelings on hold, stay loyal to the idea of you without knowing if you'll ever choose him back. That's not weakness, that's commitment. But commitment without clarity can slowly break someone. So if you have a man like that, someone willing to wait while you sort through your life, you can't treat that lightly. Take the time you need, heal what you need to heal, do what you need to do. But don't let him wait if you already know you're not coming back. Because the cruelest thing is letting someone hold on to hope when all that's waiting for them is disappointment. A lot of men won't walk away. They'll keep telling themselves one more month, one more sign, one more chance. Not because they're desperate, but because they care. So if you can love him again, do it fully. And if you can't, tell him. Don't make him wait just to slowly lose himself loving someone who was never going to return. What people don't see is what waiting does to him. Not on the outside. He looks fine. He still shows up, still laughs at the right moment, still pretends he hasn't built his days around the possibility of you coming back. But inside, everything is on pause. He doesn't let himself move on. Doesn't let himself get close to anyone else. Doesn't let himself fully hope or fully let go, because doing either would feel like betraying the future he pictured with you. So he lives in the middle, not chosen, not free, just waiting. He rereads old messages looking for reassurance that maybe he didn't imagine the connection. He remembers how you looked at him, how you laughed with him, how real it felt, and that's what keeps him there. Not obsession, not desperation, memory. He tells himself real love requires patience, that if it's meant to be, it'll come back around. But patience without direction starts turning into quiet pain, because every time you say, "I don't know yet," he hears, "Not now, but maybe," and maybe is enough to keep him holding on. What breaks him isn't waiting itself. It's not knowing whether the waiting means something to you too. He would wait longer if he knew it mattered. He would walk away if he knew it didn't. But uncertainty keeps him stuck, and the longer he stays there, the more of himself he puts on hold. His needs, his timing, his chance to be loved fully, all for someone who may never come back. And that's the part no one talks about. Waiting doesn't just cost time, it costs pieces of him he doesn't realize he's giving away. At some point, the waiting starts asking questions back, not out loud, not in a way he can easily answer, just quiet thoughts that show up late at night when there's nothing left to distract him. Am I being patient, or am I just afraid to let go? Because there's a difference. Patience comes with trust, with direction, with some kind of reassurance that the waiting has meaning, but what he has is uncertainty. He's not waiting because he's calm. He's waiting because walking away would mean admitting that the future he imagined might never happen. And that's harder than staying still, so he tells himself stories. That love is supposed to hurt a little, that timing matters more than readiness, that if he just proves he's loyal enough, consistent enough, understanding enough, it'll all make sense one day. But love isn't supposed to feel like erasing yourself. It isn't supposed to require putting your life on hold indefinitely. It isn't supposed to make you question whether your needs matter at all. Still, he stays. His hope is quiet, but it's persistent. It whispers things like, "She'll come back. She just needs time. It'll be worth it." And as long as that voice exists, letting go feels like failure, like giving up on something real. What scares him most isn't the idea of her choosing someone else. It's the idea that she might never choose anyone, and he still waited anyway. That he might look back one day and realize he sacrificed his own chance to be loved fully for someone who was never coming back. And that realization doesn't make him angry. It makes him tired, because waiting stopped feeling romantic a long time ago. Now it just feels heavy. And deep down, he's starting to understand something he's been avoiding. Love shouldn't feel like standing still while life passes you by. There comes a moment when waiting stops feeling like love and starts feeling like self-abandonment. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic breaking point. It's quieter than that. It's the realization that his life has been moving around someone who isn't moving toward him, that he's been planning a future with someone who won't even promise a present. He notices it in small ways, how he avoids making plans because what if she comes back? How he turns down opportunities because he doesn't want to feel unavailable when she finally decides. How he measures his growth, his happiness, his healing against whether or not it would still fit her. And that's when it hits him. Waiting has slowly become a way of disappearing, not because he doesn't love her, but because loving her has started costing him himself. He tells himself love requires sacrifice, but sacrifice isn't supposed to be one-sided. Real love doesn't ask you to pause your entire life without offering anything solid in return. And for the first time, he lets himself ask a dangerous question. If she never comes back, would this still have been worth it? That question hurts because the answer isn't immediate, because a part of him still wants to believe that patience will be rewarded, but another part, the quieter, tired part, knows something has to change. He starts realizing that choosing himself doesn't mean he loved her less. It means he finally loved himself enough to stop waiting in uncertainty. Letting go doesn't erase what they had. It doesn't make the feelings fake. It doesn't turn the waiting into a mistake. It just means he's done confusing hope with a promise, because love shouldn't require you to disappear quietly just to prove you're loyal. And walking away doesn't mean he stopped caring. Sometimes it means he cared enough to stop hurting himself in silence. Letting go hurts differently than waiting ever did. Waiting was familiar, painful but predictable. It gave him something to hold on to, even if that something was uncertainty. Letting go feels like free fall, because when he finally stops waiting, there's no future version of them to lean on anymore. No, maybe one day. No imagined moment where she finally says she's ready. Just silence, and that silence is loud at first. He feels it in the empty spaces where hope used to sit, in the routines he built around the idea of her coming back. For a while, he doesn't know who he is without the waiting, because waiting gave his love direction. It gave his patience purpose. It made the pain feel meaningful. Now he has to sit with something harder, grief, not just for her, but for the version of himself who believed love always meant endurance. He realizes how long he ignored his own needs, how often he told himself later, instead of asking for what he deserved now. And that realization stings, because he wasn't weak, he was loyal. He just stayed loyal to someone who couldn't meet him where he stood. Healing doesn't come all at once. Some days he still wonders if he gave up too soon, if one more month would have changed everything. But then he remembers how heavy the waiting felt, how small his world had become, how much of himself he put on hold. And slowly something shifts. He starts choosing himself in quiet ways. He makes plans without hesitation. He opens himself to new moments without checking if they'd interfere with the future that no longer exists. And for the first time in a long time, his life starts moving forward again. Letting go didn't mean he stopped loving her. It meant he stopped abandoning himself. And that's when healing actually began. After the waiting ends, there's a strange emptiness that follows, not because he lost her, but because he lost the version of himself that believed love had to hurt to be real. For a long time, his worth was tied to patience, to loyalty, to how much he was willing to endure without being chosen back. And when that chapter closed, he didn't immediately feel strong. He felt unsure, because when you spend so long putting someone else first, you forget what it feels like to be a priority in your own life. He starts noticing it in small moments, how uncomfortable it feels to ask for what he needs, how he second guesses himself when someone shows interest too easily, because ease feels unfamiliar now. He was used to earning affection, proving commitment, waiting quietly without complaint, so when someone shows up without confusion or hesitation, it almost feels wrong. Like love should require more suffering than this. That's when he realizes how deeply the waiting shaped him. He didn't just pause his life, he learned to minimize himself. He learned that his needs could wait, that his feelings were negotiable, that love meant staying even when nothing was being offered in return. Unlearning that takes time. He has to remind himself that love isn't supposed to feel uncertain, that commitment doesn't mean self-erasure, that being chosen shouldn't feel like a reward for endurance. Slowly he starts rewriting the rules. He lets himself want clarity. He lets himself walk away when something feels one-sided. He stops confusing consistency with compatibility, and piece by piece his sense of worth comes back, not because someone else validates it, but because he no longer abandons himself to keep someone else comfortable. He waited because he meant it, but now he understands something important. The right person won't need him to suffer quietly to prove his love. They'll meet him where he stands. Waiting leaves marks, not obvious ones. Nothing you can point to and explain easily. But after someone has waited that long, they don't love the same way again. He becomes more careful, not closed off, and just aware. Because once you've given that much patience to the wrong person, you learn how expensive your loyalty really is. He no longer rushes into hope, no longer builds futures in his head without evidence in the present, not because he's bitter, but because he knows what it costs to believe too soon. He listens differently now. When someone says, "I'm not ready," he hears it clearly. When someone says, "I don't know what I want," he doesn't translate it into possibility. He takes words as they are, not as promises he can grow hope around. That doesn't make him cold, it makes him intentional. He still loves deeply, still commits fully, but only where clarity exists, because waiting taught him that love shouldn't feel like uncertainty stretched over time. He no longer tries to prove his worth through endurance. He doesn't stay where effort isn't mutual. He doesn't confuse potential with reality. And that makes him harder to lose, not because he withholds love, but because he now knows when to walk away. He understands that choosing someone means choosing himself too. That real connection doesn't ask him to pause his life indefinitely. Doesn't ask him to suffer quietly just to stay loyal. Waiting didn't break him, it refined him. It taught him what love isn't, though he could finally recognize what it is. And when he loves again, it won't be out of fear of losing. It will be out of certainty. The next time he loves someone, it won't start with waiting. It'll start with clarity, because once you've waited that long for someone who couldn't meet you halfway, you stop confusing effort with connection. He won't wonder where he stands anymore. He won't analyze pauses, he won't read into silence or turn uncertainty into hope, not because he's less romantic, but because he's learned what love is supposed to feel like. The next person he loves won't have to guess how he feels. They won't have to question his loyalty. They won't have to wonder if he's serious, because when he chooses fully, but this time, he'll only stay where he's chosen back. He won't pause his life waiting for someone to decide. He won't put his heart on hold for potential. He understands now that real love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't stretch uncertainty across months and years. It doesn't ask you to sacrifice peace just to stay connected. The next person will feel the difference. Not because he loves harder, but because he loves cleaner, with boundaries, with honesty, with the expectation of mutual effort. And that's the quiet shift no one sees. Waiting didn't make him bitter, it made him precise. It taught him that commitment means nothing without intention behind it. So when he gives his time again, his patience again, his heart again, it won't be because he's afraid to lose. It'll be because both of them are choosing each other in the present. Not someday, not maybe, now. The people who wait the longest are often the hardest to replace, not because they demand attention, not because they make noise, but because they loved with patience most people don't have anymore. When he was waiting, his presence felt easy to overlook. He was steady, consistent, always there, and consistency can become invisible to people who aren't ready to value it. So they assume he'll always be there, that his patience has no limit, that his loyalty is permanent. But what they don't realize is that waiting teaches restraint. It teaches someone exactly how much they're willing to give before they stop. So when he finally walks away, it's quiet, no drama, no announcement, no attempt to make anyone regret it. He just goes, and that's when the absence is felt, because he wasn't loud, he was grounding. He was the one who remembered, the one who stayed calm, the one who made things feel safe without asking for anything in return. And when that's gone, it leaves a space that's hard to fill, not with excitement, not with attention, but with depth. That's when people realize they didn't lose someone dramatic, they lost someone rare, someone who would have waited longer than anyone else, but chose not to abandon himself anymore. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that he left, but that he learned how to leave, because once someone like that is gone, they don't come back confused. They don't come back waiting. They move forward with intention, and by the time anyone realizes what they lost, he's already chosen himself. Waiting was never the problem was waiting without being chosen back. For a long time, he believed love was proven by how much you were willing to endure, how long you could stay, how patient you could be, how quietly you could hurt without asking for reassurance, and he did that. He waited through uncertainty, through mixed signals, through not right now that never turned into I'm ready, not because he didn't value himself, but because he valued love deeply, but eventually he learned the difference between commitment and self-sacrifice. Real love doesn't keep you suspended. It doesn't ask you to pause your life while someone decides if you're worth choosing. Real love meets you where you are, and the moment he understood that, waiting lost its meaning, because waiting only makes sense when both people are moving toward each other, even slowly, not when one person is standing still hoping to be picked someday. Walking away wasn't easy. It didn't feel empowering at first. It felt like grief. Grief for the future, he imagined. Grief for the version of himself who believed patience would be rewarded no matter the cost. But over time, that grief turned into clarity. He realized something simple but life-changing. Love should feel mutual, certain, chosen in the present, not promised someday. So now, when he looks back on the waiting, he doesn't see weakness. He sees proof that he can love deeply. But he also sees the moment he learned to stop giving that depth to people who couldn't return it. He waited because he meant it, but he walked away because he finally understood that the right person won't need him to wait at all. They'll choose him clearly, willingly, and without hesitation, and that's not something you ever have to earn by putting your life on hold. Stayed loyal. That's the part that messes with me the most. Not because I regret it, but because I know I was real the whole time. I didn't switch up. I didn't look for other options. I didn't keep backups just in case. When I said I was with her, I meant it. Even when things fell off, even when her energy started changing, even when I had moments where I could have pulled back and protected myself, I didn't. Because in my head, loyalty wasn't something you give only when it's easy. It's something you keep, especially when it's not. So I stayed consistent, I stayed patient, I stayed solid in a situation that slowly stopped being solid back. And the crazy part is, while I was staying loyal, she wasn't. The part that's hard to explain is how I stayed the same. Even when everything around me started changing, I noticed it. The distance, the shift in energy, the way conversations didn't feel the same anymore. I'm not blind. I saw the signs, but I chose to stay loyal anyway, because I told myself something simple. If I'm real about this, I don't switch up just because it gets uncomfortable. So I didn't match her energy when it dropped. I didn't start moving different. I didn't go looking for someone else just because things felt uncertain. I stayed. I kept showing up the same way I always did, and maybe that was my mistake, not being loyal, but being loyal to someone who had already started moving differently behind the scenes, because while I was protecting what we had, she was slowly stepping out of it, and I didn't want to believe that because loyalty makes you believe in what something was, even when it's no longer what it is. The truth didn't hit me all at once. It came in pieces, little realizations that didn't fully make sense at first, moments where things felt off, but not off enough to walk away. I would notice small things, the way she moved differently, the way her attention felt split, the way her consistency started depending on her mood, and every time I noticed it, I told myself the same thing. Don't overthink it, because when you're loyal, you don't want to accuse someone of something they haven't admitted. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You trust what you had, instead of questioning what it's becoming. So I stayed grounded, I stayed the same. I kept treating her like she was still fully in it, even when deep down I could feel she wasn't. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that she switched up, but that I stayed solid while she was already moving differently. At some point, the truth became impossible to ignore, not because she said it, but because her actions started saying it for her. You can feel when someone isn't fully there anymore. You don't need proof, you don't need confirmation. It's in the energy, the way they reply, the way they move, the way they stop showing up the same way they used to. And I felt that, but I stayed loyal anyway, because I kept thinking loyalty meant holding on, holding it together, holding on to what we had, even if it was slipping. But here's what I didn't understand at the time. You can't hold something together by yourself, and I was the only one holding. The more I look back at it, the more I realize something that's hard to accept. I wasn't just being loyal, I was ignoring reality, because loyalty doesn't mean staying blind. It doesn't mean pretending everything is okay when it's clearly not. But that's what I was doing. I was staying consistent in a situation that was becoming inconsistent. I was giving the same energy to someone who had already started giving less, and the imbalance kept growing slowly, quietly, until it was obvious. But by then, I had already invested too much to walk away easily, and then it finally happened. Not in some dramatic way, not in a way that gave me closure, just clarity. She wasn't loyal, not in the way I was. While I was choosing her every day, she was leaving space for something else, maybe someone else, maybe just options. But either way, she wasn't standing where I was standing. And that realization hits different, because it's not just about losing someone. It's about realizing you weren't standing on the same level the whole time. For a while, that made me question everything, not just her, myself. I started thinking, was I too loyal? Did I stay too solid? Should I have moved differently? Because when someone hurts you while you're being real, it makes you feel like being real was the mistake, but it wasn't. Loyalty wasn't the problem. Giving it to the wrong person was, and that's the shift that took time to understand. Because I didn't lose by being loyal. I didn't lose because I stayed real. If anything, that's the part I kept. That's the part that didn't change. She changed. She moved different. She chose differently. But me, I stayed who I said I was. And that matters more than it feels like it does in the moment. And because here's the truth, no one tells you right away. Being loyal to the wrong person will hurt, but it will also teach you exactly what real loyalty should look like when it's returned. It shows you the difference between someone who says they care and someone who actually stands on it. And once you've felt that difference, you stop settling for anything less. You stop accepting half effort. You stop excusing inconsistency, because now you know what it feels like to give fully. So next time, you expect it back. So yeah, I stayed loyal, and she didn't, and for a while that felt like I lost, but now I see it differently, because loyalty isn't something you regret, it's something you protect. You just learn who deserves it. The right person won't make you question it, won't make you feel like you're the only one holding things together, won't make you feel stupid for being real. They'll match it naturally, consistently, without you having to ask. So no, I'm not changing the way I love I'm just changing who I give it to. Because being loyal isn't the mistake. Giving it to someone who wasn't is. Still remember the last message she ever sent me? Not because it was long, not because it explained everything, but because it didn't. It was simple, short, like it didn't carry the weight of everything that came before it. And that's what made it hit harder. Because how do you go from talking every day to one final message that feels like nothing? At first, I kept rereading it, not because I didn't understand it, but because I felt like there had to be something more hidden in it, some deeper meaning, some explanation between the lines, something that would make it all make sense. But there wasn't. It said just enough to end things and not enough to explain them, and that's what messes with you, because your mind keeps trying to fill in the gaps that they left empty. I kept thinking back to everything before that message, all the conversations, all the moments that felt real, all the things she said that made it seem like we were building something. And then I'd look at that last message again, and it didn't match. It didn't feel like it came from the same person. Because how do you go from consistency to something that feels so detached, so final, without feeling final at all? The hardest part wasn't even what she said, it was what she didn't say. No real explanation, no real accountability, no real closure, just something that closed the door without ever fully acknowledging what was behind it. And that leaves you stuck in a weird place, because you're not just dealing with an ending, you're dealing with questions that never got answers. For a while I wanted to reply, not to argue, not to convince her to stay, just to understand, to ask the questions that were sitting in my head. What changed? When did it change? Was any of it real? But I didn't, because deep down I knew something. If she wanted me to understand, she would have explained it the first time. And that's a hard truth to accept, because it means the silence after that message was intentional, not confusion, not hesitation, a decision. She said what she wanted to say, and everything she didn't say was also part of that choice. After that, the conversation just stopped. No follow-ups, no checking in, no, how are you? Just silence. And silence hits different when you're used to hearing from someone every day. Because now it's not just quiet, it's absence. For a while, I kept expecting another message, something more, something that would make it feel complete. But nothing came, and eventually I had to accept something I didn't want to. That last message was really the last one. And over time I stopped looking at it like something unfinished. I stopped expecting more, because sometimes closure doesn't come from another person. It comes from accepting what they already showed you, and what she showed me was enough, even if it wasn't explained. I still remember the last message she sent me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. It was the end. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. And now I understand something I didn't then. The way someone ends things tells you everything you need to know about how they saw it. So I stopped waiting for another message, stopped looking for more words, because the last one was already saying everything it needed to, just not in the way I wanted. Keep ignoring the red flags, because all you want is love. Not peace, not respect, not consistency, just love. You see the signs, you see the unanswered calls, the constant busy, the way you're always an option, never a priority. And instead of asking why it hurts, you ask how to endure it. You tell yourself it's patience, that it's loyalty, that love means staying even when it costs you. But let's be honest, she doesn't check on you. She doesn't consider your feelings. She doesn't show up the way you do. And you know that. You just don't want to face what it says about you for staying. So here's the real question you've been avoiding. How much do you actually love yourself? Because when you stay in situations that keep hurting you, when you keep accepting disrespect just to feel close to someone, that's not love. That's neglect. If you truly loved yourself, you wouldn't keep choosing pain just to feel wanted. You wouldn't keep lowering your standards to keep someone around who clearly isn't choosing you back. But you don't protect yourself, you sacrifice yourself, because being alone scares you more than being hurt. And that's why you accept the bare minimum. That's why you stay in toxic cycles. That's why you confuse attachment with love. You're not holding on because it's good for you. You're holding on because it's the only version of love you think you deserve. And that's the lie. You don't need someone else to complete you. What you actually need is to stop outsourcing your worth. Because the moment you start loving yourself, really loving yourself, you stop begging for attention. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop calling pain connection. You stop chasing people who only show up halfway. Self-love doesn't make you selfish. It makes you unavailable to anything that keeps breaking you. And until you learn that, you'll keep calling suffering love and calling survival loyalty. You are worth more than crumbs. You are worth more than confusion. You are worth more than being an option. But no one can convince you of that until you decide to believe it yourself. Here's the truth you keep avoiding. You don't stay because you don't see the red flags. You stay because you think leaving means nobody else will love you, so you make excuses. She's busy. She's going through stuff. She just doesn't show love the same way. But effort isn't a love language. It's a choice. And when someone keeps choosing not to show up for you, that's not confusion, that's clarity. You're not being patient. You're being hopeful in a place that's already shown you who it is. You keep giving grace to people who wouldn't give you the same. You keep explaining your pain to someone who already decided it wasn't important enough to change. And every time you stay, you send yourself a message. My feelings come second. My needs are optional. This is the best I can get. That's not love. That's self-betrayal. You think walking away means losing them, but what you're really losing right now is respect for yourself, because someone who values you doesn't make you question your worth. They don't make you beg for consistency. They don't disappear and call it space. And the reason this keeps happening isn't because you love too hard. It's because you don't love yourself hard enough to leave when you should. The moment you start choosing yourself, red flags stop looking like obstacles and start looking like exits. And exits aren't failures, they're protection. Ignoring red flags doesn't just hurt you once, it trains people how to treat you. Every time you stay after disrespect, you teach them you'll tolerate it. Every time you forgive without change, you show them your boundaries don't mean much, and they adjust accordingly. They respond less. They try less, they care just enough to keep you around, but never enough to show up fully. Because why would they? You already proved you'll stay without effort. You think you're being understanding, but what you're really doing is normalizing behavior that shouldn't have access to you. You answer late replies immediately. You accept apologies without accountability. You let patterns repeat because you're afraid of starting over, and slowly, your standards drop while their comfort rises. That's the trade you're making. You're giving someone emotional safety while you live in emotional uncertainty. And the worst part? You start blaming yourself. You tell yourself you're asking for too much, that you're sensitive, that this is just how relationships are. But healthy love doesn't require endurance. You don't have to survive it. You don't have to fight for basic respect. You don't have to convince someone to treat you well. Red flags aren't challenges to overcome. They're warnings to listen to, and the longer you ignore them, the harder it becomes to remember what being valued even feels like. The pattern doesn't break when they change, it breaks when you do. The reason you keep ignoring red flags is because you confuse attachment with love. Love feels steady, attachment feels urgent. Love doesn't make you anxious. Attachment keeps you checking your phone, replaying conversations, wondering where you stand, and you call that passion. But what you're really feeling is fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, fear that if you don't hold on tight, you'll be forgotten. So you cling, you stay when you should leave, you wait when there's nothing coming. You accept excuses because they're easier than facing the truth. That truth being, someone who wants you won't make you feel optional. Attachment makes you chase because it needs reassurance. Love doesn't chase, It meets. And until you learn the difference, every red flag will feel like something you just need to work through. You'll keep calling distance space, disrespect miscommunication, inconsistency timing, but your body already knows that tight feeling in your chest, that constant unease, that feeling of giving more than you're getting. That's not love warning you to try harder. That's your self-respect telling you to stop. You don't need clearer signs. You don't need closure. You don't need one more conversation. You need the courage to admit that attachment is keeping you stuck in places love would never ask you to stay. Walking away feels harder than staying because staying lets you avoid the truth. As long as you're still there, you can tell yourself it might change, that maybe tomorrow they'll care more, that maybe you're just being tested. Hope keeps you stuck because leaving means admitting you invested in something that wasn't good for you. It means admitting you ignored your instincts, that you stayed longer than you should have, that you loved someone who couldn't meet you halfway, and that hurts your pride. So instead, you endure. You tell yourself pain is temporary, that love requires sacrifice, that every relationship has rough patches, but here's the part you don't want to hear. Love doesn't consistently make you feel small. It doesn't drain you. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting basic respect. You stay because leaving forces accountability, not for them, but for you. It forces you to ask why you accepted less, why you ignored the signs, why you stayed quiet when your boundaries were crossed. And that's uncomfortable. But staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. Every day you remain in a situation that disrespects you, you reinforce the belief that this is all you deserve, and that belief is the real damage. Walking away isn't giving up on love, it's giving up on self-betrayal. And the moment you finally choose yourself, red flags stop feeling confusing. They feel obvious. The moment you stop ignoring red flags, everything gets quiet. No chaos, no anxiety spikes, no constant checking to see if someone still wants you. And at first, that silence feels uncomfortable because you're used to confusion, used to emotional ups and downs, used to love feeling like something you have to manage. So when you finally walk away, your brain starts questioning you. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe this is just how love feels. But that's just withdrawal. You're not missing them. You're missing the familiarity of the pattern because ignoring red flags wasn't just about them. It was about what you were willing to tolerate to avoid being alone. Now that you've chosen yourself, you start seeing things clearly. You realize how drained you were, how often you made excuses, how little you were actually asking for compared to how much you were giving, and that clarity changes you. You don't feel pulled toward inconsistency anymore. You don't chase mixed signals. You don't feel tempted by people who only show up halfway. Because once you experience peace, chaos stops feeling exciting. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop believing love has to hurt. You stop confusing anxiety with connection. And here's the biggest shift. You stop trying to be chosen. You start choosing. Who gets access to you? Who gets your time? Who gets your emotional energy? Red flags don't feel like puzzles anymore. They feel like answers. And instead of asking me, can I make this work? You ask, does this protect me? That's when self-respect kicks in. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. When you stop ignoring red flags, people from your past don't recognize you anymore. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you stopped being convenient. You don't explain yourself as much. You don't over-justify your boundaries. You don't stay in conversations that feel disrespectful or draining, and that confuses people. They're used to the version of you that stayed quiet, that gave chances, that tried to understand at the expense of being understood. So when you walk away faster now, they call you cold. They say you've changed. They say you're doing too much. But what they really mean is you're no longer available for the dynamic they benefited from. People who thrived on your tolerance don't like your standards. People who were comfortable with your silence don't like your clarity. And that's okay. because growth isn't about being liked, it's about being protected. You're not harsh, you're not bitter, you're not closed off. You're just done negotiating your self-respect. You no longer wait for disrespect to become unbearable before leaving. You don't need proof anymore. The first pattern is enough. And here's the part that matters most. The right people won't question this version of you. They won't push your boundaries. They won't test your tolerance. They won't need you to over-explain. They'll feel your standards and meet them naturally. Anyone who leaves because you stopped accepting red flags was never meant to stay anyway. That's not loss, that's alignment. Self-respect feels lonely at first, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you stopped tolerating what everyone else normalized. You don't have constant access to people anymore. You don't have drama to distract you. You don't have half connections keeping you entertained. And that quiet can feel heavy, because for a long time, chaos made you feel needed, inconsistency made you feel chosen, fixing things made you feel valuable. Now none of that is there, and your brain tries to convince you that you're missing out, that maybe you were happier when you stayed, that maybe standards are overrated, that maybe being lonely is worse than being disrespected. But that's just the adjustment period. You're unlearning a pattern where love had to hurt to feel real. Self-respect strips away the noise and leaves you with truth. You start seeing how many connections were built on convenience instead of care. How many people stayed because you made it easy for them, not because they valued you. And yes, that realization stings, but it also gives you something you didn't have before. Peace, no guessing, no waiting, no emotional whiplash, just clarity. And from that clarity, your standards get quieter but stronger. You don't announce them, you don't defend them, you just live by them. And anyone who can't meet you there falls away naturally. Loneliness isn't punishment here. It's space to rebuild your sense of worth without someone else validating it, space to remember who you are when you're not chasing or fixing or proving, and soon that loneliness turns into confidence, not loud confidence, stable confidence, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that doesn't beg, the kind that knows red flags aren't obstacles, they're directions. At some point you realize something uncomfortable. You don't actually miss them. You miss the version of yourself that kept trying to be enough. You miss the effort you gave, the hope you held on to, the belief that if you just loved harder, things would finally change because chasing gave you purpose. It made your pain feel meaningful. It made waiting feel justified. It made disappointment feel like part of the process. Now that you've stopped, there's nothing left to fix. And that's when the grief shows up. You grieve the time you spent trying to earn what should have been given freely. You grieve the energy you poured into people who never poured back. You grieve the patience you mistook for love, not because you were foolish, but because you cared. And it hurts to admit that caring didn't save anything. You start seeing clearly how often you ignored your own voice, how many times your body told you to leave while your heart begged you to stay. You stayed loyal to people who weren't loyal to your peace, and that realization is heavy, because now you can't go back, you can't unsee the patterns, you can't pretend disrespect was accidental, you can't convince yourself that red flags were just misunderstandings. You've outgrown the version of you that survived on hope alone, and while that growth is necessary, it still feels like loss. But here's the truth. You didn't lose something real. You let go of something that only existed because you kept tolerating it. And the more distance you get, the clearer it becomes. What you were missing wasn't love, it was self-respect. Ignoring red flags was never about love. It was about not wanting to choose yourself. Because choosing yourself meant walking away without guarantees, without reassurance, without someone else filling the silence, so you stayed. You told yourself love takes patience, that people need time, that your pain was just part of the process, but deep down, you knew the truth. You weren't staying because it felt right. You were staying because leaving felt terrifying. terrifying to be alone, terrifying to admit you deserved better, terrifying to sit with the idea that you chose someone who couldn't choose you back, though you ignored the signs, not because you didn't see them, but because seeing them meant action, and action meant accountability. But here's what finally clicks. Red flags don't hurt you. Ignoring them does. Every time you stayed, you taught yourself that your needs were optional. Every time you excused behavior, you taught yourself that love should be endured. Every time you waited for change, you delayed your own growth. And that cycle doesn't end when someone finally treats you right. It ends when you stop accepting what treats you wrong. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop wanting love. It means you stop betraying yourself just to keep it. It means you walk away sooner. You trust discomfort. You listen the first time something feels off. Not because you're cold, but because you're done confusing pain with connection. And once you reach this point, red flags don't feel complicated anymore. They feel clear. You don't argue with them. You don't negotiate with them. You don't try to turn them green. You leave because now you understand something you didn't before. Being alone is temporary. Self-betrayal is cumulative. And you're no longer willing to pay that price. That's not bitterness. That's self-respect. And that's where the cycle finally ends. I don't care how corny it sounds. I'm not going to stop being a lover. Not until I get the kind of love I've always imagined. The kind where there's no confusion, no wandering attention, no half-interest disguised as effort. Just one person and a world that feels smaller because of it. I want love where focus doesn't drift, where nobody else even registers, where loving them feels instinctive, not forced. The kind of love that doesn't try to be cinematic, it just is. Two people driving with no destination, standing in open fields, traveling for no reason other than wanting to be together. The kind of love you don't just feel in your chest, you feel it in your soul, hot, intense, alive. And I don't understand how people walk around pretending that kind of love doesn't matter. Like love is casual, like attachment is embarrassing, like caring deeply is something you should hide, because love is everything. It's sharing the world with someone, learning their habits, reading their moods, knowing them in ways no one else does. It's going from stranger to someone you can't imagine life without. And yeah, love comes with risk, heartbreak, loss, pain, but I'm here for all of it. Because if that's the price of loving deeply, I'll pay it. I'll take the uncertainty, I'll take the scars, I'll take the ache that comes with caring. What makes it hard sometimes isn't loving deeply, it's loving deeply in a world that pretends not to care. People act like being attached is weak, like wanting someone fully is desperate. They call it being nonchalant. They call it cool. They call it protecting yourself. But to me, it just feels empty. I don't want love that's casual. I don't want half interest. I don't want to pretend I wouldn't be devastated if I lost someone I truly cared about. I want to feel it, all of it. I want the kind of love where my heart is completely in, no exits, no backups, no pretending. And yeah, that makes me vulnerable. It means I get hurt easier. It means I feel things more intensely, but I'd rather feel everything than live numb just to look unbothered. Because loving deeply isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes guts to say, I want you fully. I'm choosing you. I'm not scared to care. And maybe that's why it feels lonely sometimes, because not everyone is built to love like that. Some people close their hearts after pain. Others keep theirs open, not because they're naive, but because they refuse to let disappointment turn them cold. You don't love deeply because it's easy. You love deeply because it's who you are. And even when it costs you, you'd still rather feel everything than live a life that feels hollow. You already know how this can end. You know love can break you. You know it can leave scars. You know it can take pieces you don't get back. And still, you choose it. Not because you're reckless, not because you're desperate, but because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. You're not chasing perfection, you're chasing connection. The kind that makes ordinary moments feel alive, the kind that makes the world feel louder and quieter at the same time. And once you've felt even a glimpse of that, you can't pretend you don't want it anymore. So yeah, you risk it again, you open your heart again, you believe again, not because you forgot the pain, but because you decided it wasn't stronger than your capacity to love. Being a lover boy doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you face it and still choose love anyway. You're not asking for perfection, you're asking for presence, for a love that feels mutual, chosen, clear. And wanting that doesn't make you unrealistic, it makes you honest. Because once you know how deeply you can love, you stop settling for anything that asks you to dim that fire. So, no, the lover boy in you isn't dying, he's just waiting. And when the right love finally arrives, he'll be ready. What people don't realize is how much strength it takes to stay soft in a world that rewards detachment. It's easier to act unbothered, easier to keep things light, easier to pretend you don't care that much, but you were never built that way. You don't love halfway, you don't feel quietly. When you care, it shows in your effort, in your loyalty, and how present you are. And that's exactly what people try to shame out of you. They tell you you're too much, too attached, too intense. Like love is something you're supposed to ration. So sometimes you wonder if you should change, if caring less would protect you, if closing off would finally make things easier. But every time you try, it feels wrong, because pretending not to care cost you more than heartbreak ever did. You don't want a love where you're constantly monitoring yourself, where you have to downplay your feelings to seem cool. You want a love where effort isn't embarrassing, where loyalty isn't laughed at, where wanting someone fully isn't treated like a flaw. And yes, that kind of love is rare, not because it doesn't exist, but because not everyone has the capacity for it. Some people love with caution, some love with conditions, some love with one foot out the door. You love with your whole chest, and that means when it ends, it hurts differently. You don't just lose a person, you lose the future you already pictured, the version of yourself that only existed with them. But even after that pain, you don't harden, you don't turn cold, you don't become bitter, you grieve, and then you stay open. Not because you're naive, but because you understand something others don't. Love isn't dangerous, avoidance is. A life spent protecting yourself from ever being hurt is a life spent never being fully alive. So you keep choosing love, even when it costs you, even when it scares you. Because being a lover was never about guarantees, it was about courage. And no matter how many times the world tells you to be smaller, to care less, to guard your heart, you don't. Because the lover boy in you knows one truth: a heart that can love deeply is never something to be ashamed of. People who love like you often feel out of place, not because there's something wrong with them, but because the world isn't built for hearts that don't know how to love halfway. You walk into spaces where everyone is guarding themselves, where effort is calculated, where caring too much is treated like a mistake you should have learned from by now. And you can feel it, the hesitation, the emotional distance, the way people keep one foot out the door just in case. Meanwhile, you're standing there ready to choose someone fully if they'd just meet you halfway. That contrast can feel isolating. You start wondering if you're outdated, if your way of loving belongs to another time, another kind of world, because it feels like everyone else is playing it safe while you're still willing to risk your heart, and that makes you stand out. Not loudly, but deeply. You don't bond casually, you don't talk just to fill silence. When you connect, you notice things others miss, you remember details people forget, you show up in ways that don't disappear easily, and that kind of presence can be uncomfortable for people who aren't ready to be seen that closely. So they pull back, they joke about you caring too much, they call your intensity a lot. Not because it is, but because they don't know how to match it. That's the part that hurts, realizing you're not too much, you're just too deep for people who only know how to skim the surface. You don't want love that feels convenient, you want love that feels intentional. You don't want someone who chooses you when it's easy. You want someone who chooses you because they mean it. And yeah, that narrows the field. It means you'll feel alone sometimes. It means you'll walk away more than you stay. It means you won't fit everywhere. But fitting everywhere was never the goal. The longing was. The lover boy in you isn't broken because he doesn't blend in. He just hasn't found the place where his kind of love is spoken fluently. And when he does, it won't feel like standing out anymore. It'll feel like coming home. Loving this deeply almost always comes with loneliness first. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because alignment takes time. When you love with your whole heart, you don't rush into anything just to feel chosen. You don't settle for attention that fades. You don't accept half presence just to avoid being alone. And that means there are stretches where it feels like everyone else has someone and you don't. You watch people pair up quickly, jump from connection to connection, call it love because it fills the space, and sometimes you wonder if you're being too patient, too selective, too unwilling to compromise. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of being half-loved. You don't want a relationship that feels like constant self-editing, where you have to mute your feelings, where your intensity is treated like a problem instead of a gift. So you wait, not passively, intentionally. You keep your heart open, but your standards intact. And that's the lonely part no one talks about. Choosing alignment over company, choosing depth over distraction, choosing to sit with the emptiness rather than fill it with something that won't last. Some nights it feels heavy. You question whether it's worth it, whether anyone will ever meet you at the level you're willing to love. But then you remember something important. The love you want can't be rushed. It needs two people who aren't scared of closeness, who don't joke about vulnerability, who don't treat commitment like a trap. And until that shows up, being alone is still safer than shrinking yourself. The lover boy in you isn't lonely because he's lacking. He's lonely because he's waiting for something real. And real love doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives aligned. The lover boy gets misunderstood a lot. People look at the way you love and assume it comes from neediness, from insecurity, from not knowing how to be alone. But that's never been true. You don't love deeply because you're afraid of being by yourself. You love deeply because you know how to be alone and still choose connection. There's a difference. You're not reaching for someone to fill a void. You're reaching because you want to share a life you already know how to carry on your own. But in a world obsessed with detachment, depth gets mislabeled, caring becomes too much, consistency becomes clingy, wanting clarity becomes pressure, so people tell you to chill, to play it cool, to act like you don't care as much as you do. And for a while you try. You soften your words, you hold back your feelings, you pretend you're less invested than your heart actually is. But it never feels right. Because loving quietly when you feel loudly starts to feel like lying to yourself. You don't want to be mysterious. You don't want to be distant. You don't want to be someone who treats love like a game of leverage. You want honesty. You want effort that isn't embarrassing. Commitment that isn't mocked. Connection that doesn't require you to minimize who you are. And the truth is, people who can't handle that were never going to meet you where you stand anyway. They confuse emotional availability with weakness because they've never felt safe enough to offer it themselves. So they pull away, they joke, they keep things light, not because you're too much, but because your depth asks them to be real. And not everyone is ready for that. The lover boy isn't misunderstood because he loves wrong. He's misunderstood because he loves honestly in a world that prefers control. And one day, someone won't ask you to tone it down. They won't call your care extra. They won't flinch at your intensity. They'll recognize it because they've been looking for someone who loves like you, without fear, without games, without holding back. One thing people get wrong about you is thinking you lose yourself in love, that you disappear, that you abandon who you are, just keep someone close. But that's not what loving deeply means to you. You don't give your heart away blindly. You give it intentionally. You're aware of the risk. You feel the fear. You know exactly how much it can hurt, and you still choose to love, not because you don't value yourself, but because you refuse to live guarded out of fear. There's a difference between protecting your heart and closing it. Closing it is pretending you don't care. Protecting it is knowing when to walk away without turning cold. And that's something you had to learn the hard way. You've loved people who couldn't meet you emotionally, who enjoyed your warmth but never offered shelter in return. And each time you didn't lose your softness, you refined it. You learned to notice effort, to listen to consistency, to believe actions more than potential. You learned that loving deeply doesn't mean tolerating confusion. It doesn't mean waiting forever. It doesn't mean accepting less than what you give. So now you love with boundaries, not walls, boundaries. You stay open, but you don't stay where you feel unseen. You express yourself, but you don't beg to be understood. You give fully, but only where there's room for you. That's growth. The lover boy in you didn't harden, he matured. He learned that protecting his heart doesn't mean dimming his light. It means choosing spaces where that light is welcomed. And that's why when you love again, it won't consume you. It'll expand you, because this time you won't confuse intensity with imbalance. You'll recognize the difference between passion and peace. At some point, you stop mistaking chaos for passion. You stop thinking intensity means confusion. You stop believing love has to feel unstable to feel real. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes after loving people who kept you guessing, after giving effort that wasn't matched, after realizing how tired you were from loving alone in a two-person connection. Because for a long time, you thought love was supposed to feel urgent, heavy, like something you had to fight for. But real reciprocity feels different. It doesn't spike your anxiety. It doesn't make you question your place. It doesn't leave you replaying conversations or wondering if you asked for too much. Mutual love feels calm, not boring, steady. It feels like someone meeting your effort without keeping score, like someone choosing you without needing to be convinced. And at first, that kind of love almost feels unfamiliar, because you're used to proving yourself, used to earning attention, used to being the one who cares more. So when someone shows up consistently, communicates clearly, and doesn't flinch at your depth, your body has to unlearn the chaos. You have to remind yourself that peace doesn't mean lack of passion. It means safety. You don't feel smaller around them. You don't feel like you're too much. You don't feel like you need to dim anything. Your intensity doesn't scare them. It reassures them. And that's when it clicks. Love was never supposed to feel like survival. It was supposed to feel like partnership. The lover boy doesn't stop loving deeply. He just stops loving unevenly. He stops pouring into places that don't pour back. He stops calling inconsistency timing, stops calling confusion chemistry, stops calling bare minimum effort. Because once you've tasted reciprocity, you can't go back. You can't unfeel what it's like to be met where you stand. And that's when loving deeply finally feels light. Loving deeply doesn't disappear. It just becomes selective. After everything you've felt, everything you've learned, you don't stop wanting connection. You stop giving it away too easily. You don't rush anymore. Not because you're guarded, but because you understand your capacity. You know how much you give, how present you are, how deeply you attach, and you're careful about where that kind of love lands. That doesn't mean you're closed off. It means you're intentional. You don't entertain mixed signals. You don't romanticize inconsistency. You don't chase potential while ignoring reality. You pay attention now to effort, to follow through, to how someone shows up when things are calm, not just when things are exciting. Because you've learned that real love isn't proven in intensity alone. It's proven in consistency, and the people who are right for you won't be intimidated by that. They won't feel pressured by your depth. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't need you to shrink to make them comfortable. They'll respect the way you love because they love the same way. That's the shift. You're not asking for more than before. You're just no longer accepting less. You still want closeness, still want loyalty, still want that kind of connection where the world feels quieter because someone chose you fully. But now you're patient with people, not with uncertainty. You're open to love, not to confusion. And that's how the lover boy grows. Not into someone colder, but into someone clearer. Someone who knows that loving deeply isn't about giving your heart to everyone who shows interest. It's about giving it to someone who knows how to hold it. Before the right love shows up, the lover boy is usually alone for a while. Not because he can't find connection, but because he refuses to force it. He's learned what happens when you fill space just to avoid loneliness, how quickly comfort turns into compromise, how easy it is to lose yourself when you accept something that doesn't fully meet you. So he chooses solitude instead, and solitude teaches him things love never could. It shows him who he is without anyone else's expectations, without adjusting his emotions, without holding back his intensity to make someone stay. He learns how to sit with himself, how to enjoy quiet, how to be fulfilled without external validation. And that's important because when you know how to be alone, you stop accepting love that feels like abandonment in disguise. During this time, he doesn't become detached, he becomes clear about what drains him, clear about what feels safe, clear about the kind of love that actually aligns with who he is. He stops craving attention, stops mistaking chemistry for compatibility, stops confusing being wanted with being understood. And yes, some days are heavy. He still wants connection, still imagines sharing moments with someone, still feels that pull toward closeness. But the difference now is that he won't trade his peace for proximity. He knows the right love won't require him to chase, won't ask him to question his worth, won't make him feel like he has to earn care. So he waits, not anxiously, not desperately, but confidently, because he understands something now. Being alone isn't a punishment. It's preparation. It's a space where he becomes exactly the version of himself the right love will recognize immediately. And when that love finally arrives, it won't feel like relief. It'll feel familiar. The lover boy was never naive. He knew what love could cost him. He knew how deeply it could hurt. He knew it could break him, leave marks he'd carry for years, and he chose it anyway. Not because he didn't understand the risk, but because a life without love felt smaller than a life with scars. For a long time, he thought loving this way was a flaw, something he'd eventually outgrow, something pain was supposed to cure, but it never did. Every heartbreak slowed him down, made him more careful, more aware, but it never killed that part of him that wanted connection, because loving it deeply was never a phase. It was part of his design. He wasn't meant to love casually. He wasn't built for half interest or emotional distance. He was built to choose one person and mean it. That's why it hurt more. That's why waiting felt heavier. That's why walking away took courage. But all of it shaped him. It taught him boundaries without bitterness, standards without arrogance, patience without self-abandonment. So now, when he looks back, he doesn't regret loving the way he did. He doesn't regret caring too much. He doesn't regret believing. He doesn't regret wanting something rare, because one day someone will meet him in that same place. They won't flinch at his intensity. They won't joke about his softness. They won't treat his loyalty like it's replaceable. They'll recognize it. And when that happens, everything will feel different. No anxiety, no confusion, no wondering where he stands, just clarity. Effort that feels mutual, love that feels chosen, connection that doesn't require him to dim anything, and suddenly all the waiting makes sense. Not because it was easy, Dios, but because it protected him from settling for less than he was capable of giving. So no, the lover boy doesn't die, he doesn't disappear, he doesn't harden into someone unrecognizable. He just learns who deserves him. And when the right love finally arrives, he won't have to prove anything. He'll simply be met, and that's all he ever wanted. Replace me in a week, 7 days. And I've replayed that number in my head more times than I'd like to admit. Because when something you invested months, maybe years, into gets swapped out in 7 days, it doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes you. It makes you question your perception, it makes you question your value, it makes you question whether what you had was ever real in the first place. I keep thinking about how we ended the conversations, the tone, the way she said she needed time, the way she said she had to focus on herself, and then a week later there's someone else standing where I used to stand. So what was the truth? Was she grieving while I was still loving? Was she detaching while I was trying? Was I the only one still emotionally present toward the end? Because you don't replace someone in a week unless you were already halfway gone. That's the part that keeps echoing in my mind. You don't wake up on Monday heartbroken and by Sunday decide you're ready for someone new. That's not healing, that's transition. And if she transitioned that smoothly, that quickly, then maybe I wasn't as permanent in her world as she was in mine. And that realization stings more than the breakup itself, because breakups hurt. But being replaced fast, that attacks your identity. It makes you feel temporary, it makes you feel interchangeable, it makes you feel like you were just holding a spot until something better came along. And I hate that my mind even goes there. But when someone replaces you in a week, you start asking dangerous questions. Was I not enough? Was I boring? Was I too available? Did she already have him lined up? Was I just comfortable, not essential? And the scary part is, your brain doesn't just ask those questions, it starts believing them. You start comparing yourself to someone you don't even know. You start imagining that he must have something you didn't. More excitement, more dominance, more money, more mystery, more something. And now it feels like you lost a competition you didn't even know you were in. But love was never supposed to be competitive. It was supposed to be intentional, chosen, protected. And if she could swap me out in 7 days, then maybe what we had wasn't as protected as I thought. Maybe I was fighting for something that was already slipping away. Maybe I was loving someone who had already emotionally exited. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that she found someone new, but that she found someone new that quickly, because that speed tells a story. And I'm still trying to figure out what that story says about me. I think what really messed with me wasn't just that she replaced me, it was how effortless it looked, how natural she made it seem. Like I was just a chapter she flipped past without rereading, because I'm still here sitting with it, still replaying the last conversations in my head, still wondering if I missed signs, still trying to understand where it actually started falling apart, and she's already smiling next to someone new. That kind of speed doesn't just hurt, it humiliates you. It makes you feel like you were the only one emotionally invested at the end. Like while you were trying to fix it, she was already detaching. Like while you were thinking, we just need time, she was thinking, I need someone else. And the scariest part, I don't know which version of reality is true. Was she already talking to him before we ended? Was I slowly being phased out while I was still trying to show up? Or did she just move on that fast because she can't be alone? Every scenario hurts in a different way. If she was already lining him up, then I was loving someone who was preparing my replacement. If she just needed validation that quickly, then I was never the emotional anchor I thought I was. And if she genuinely didn't feel anything after it ended, then maybe I meant less than I believed. That's what a 1-week replacement does to your mind. It makes you question the entire foundation. You start rewriting memories. That time she seemed distant, that time she picked a fight out of nowhere, that time she said she felt confused. Now they don't feel random anymore. Now they feel like early signs of an exit. And the worst part is realizing that you might have been the only one still emotionally inside the relationship toward the end, because you can't replace someone in a week unless you were already halfway gone. And that's the sentence that keeps echoing. Halfway gone. Maybe she left emotionally months ago. Maybe I was loving someone who had already checked out. Maybe the breakup wasn't the beginning of the end. Maybe it was just the announcement, and that realization shifts the pain, because now it's not just heartbreak, it's feeling blindsided, it's feeling like you were operating on outdated information, like you thought you were both building, but she was already packing. And I hate that this makes me question my value, because logically, I know someone moving on fast doesn't define me, but emotionally, it feels like it does. It feels like I was replaceable, interchangeable, temporary, and nobody wants to feel temporary in something they treated as permanent. I keep thinking about how deeply I committed, how I shut down distractions, how I defended her when people doubted us, how I chose her repeatedly. And now it feels like I was the only one guarding something she was willing to trade. That's what makes it feel unfair. Not that she moved on, but that she moved on like it was easy, like I was just space that needed to be filled. And that's the dangerous thought, because I wasn't just space, I was time, I was effort, I was loyalty, I was presence. And if she could replace all of that in 7 days, then either she never fully valued it, or she never fully processed it. And I don't know which one hurts more, because if she didn't value it, then I misjudged everything. And if she didn't process it, then she's just distracting herself. But distraction still feels like replacement when you're the one left behind. And I'm left here trying to rebuild confidence that got shaken by a 7-day timeline, trying to remind myself that speed doesn't equal significance, trying to remember that depth doesn't get erased overnight, because if what we had was real to me, then it was real, even if she replaced it quickly. But still, 7 days. That number doesn't just represent time, it represents how fast someone can move on when you thought you meant more. And I'm still trying to figure out what that says about her and what it doesn't say about me. The part nobody prepares you for is how fast replacement attacks your confidence, not just your feelings, your confidence, because heartbreak hurts your chest, but being replaced quickly hits your ego. And ego isn't pride, ego is identity. It's how you see yourself. And when someone moves on in a week, your brain starts filling in blanks you never wanted to think about. You start comparing yourself to someone you don't even know. What does he have that I don't? Is he more exciting, more unpredictable, more emotionally unavailable, more dominant, more detached? Did she need someone less steady, less serious, less invested? You start dissecting yourself like you were the problem to be solved. And that's dangerous, because now it's not just about her moving on, it's about you feeling like you lost to someone else, like this was a competition, like you were weighed against another option and didn't measure up. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about. If someone can replace you in a week, they didn't replace you. They replaced the role, they replaced the attention, they replaced the space, they replaced the feeling of not being alone. But connection, real connection, that doesn't get swapped that quickly. You can substitute company, you can substitute validation, but you can't duplicate depth overnight. And I have to keep reminding myself of that, because when you see them laughing together, posting together, looking comfortable together, your mind doesn't care about logic. It sees images and it translates them into meaning. They're happier. She upgraded. You weren't enough. But images don't show history. They don't show inside jokes. They don't show late night vulnerability. They don't show how deeply you invested. They show a moment, and moments are easy to manufacture. Depth takes time, and if she replaced me in 7 days, then either she had already emotionally left long before we officially ended, or she doesn't process loss the way I do. And both are hard to accept, because if she left emotionally before I did, then I was loving someone who was already gone. And if she doesn't process loss deeply, then I was loving someone who doesn't sit with pain. She escapes it. And escape looks like replacement when you're the one grieving. I won't lie though. Part of what hurts is feeling disposable, like I was just a chapter, like I was just a phase, like I was someone she needed for that season. And once it was over, I was easy to move past. But here's what I'm starting to understand. People who move on that quickly aren't necessarily healed. They're avoiding, they're filling silence, they're covering discomfort because sitting alone after a breakup is uncomfortable. It forces reflection, it forces accountability, it forces grief, and not everyone has the emotional discipline to sit with that. Some people run straight into the next distraction, not because the previous person meant nothing, but because feeling nothing feels easier than feeling everything. And I need to remember that her timeline isn't a measurement of my worth. It's a reflection of her coping style. Still, that doesn't erase the sting, because I'm still here thinking about what we had. Still processing, still grieving, still reconstructing my confidence, and she's already building something new. That imbalance feels unfair, like I'm stuck in emotional traffic while she sped through the exit ramp, and maybe that's the hardest pill to swallow. Not that she found someone else, but that she found someone else while I'm still untangling myself from what we were. It makes you feel behind, like you're losing, like you're weaker for caring longer, but caring longer isn't weakness, it's depth, and depth doesn't reset in 7 days. So maybe the real truth is this: she replaced the position, but she didn't replace the impact. And if what we had was real to me, then it mattered. Even if she chose not to sit in it, even if she chose speed over reflection, because I would rather be the one who feels deeply than the one who forgets quickly. 7 days might look like replacement, but sometimes it's just avoidance in disguise. And one day, when the distraction fades, she might finally sit with what I've been sitting with this whole time, and by then I'll be further ahead emotionally than she ever was, not because I moved on faster, but because I actually processed it. And that's something nobody can replace in a week. The worst part about her replacing me in a week isn't even the new guy, it's the silence that came with it, because when someone moves on that fast, they don't just leave you, they erase you, the calls stop, the inside jokes disappear, the routine you built together vanishes, and suddenly the person who used to know your schedule, your moods, your patterns is giving that attention to someone else. That's what makes it feel unreal, because it's not just that she found someone new, it's that she redirected everything so easily. The same energy, the same time, the same effort, just different face. And that's when your mind spirals into the dangerous place. If she can give someone else what she gave me that quickly, was it ever special? That question hits hard, because we don't just want to be loved, we want to feel irreplaceable. We want to feel like what we built had weight, like it left a mark, like it couldn't just be swapped out like a profile picture. And when she replaced me in 7 days, it felt like I was lightweight, like I was something she could carry easily and set down just as easily. But here's the thing I keep wrestling with. Maybe it wasn't easy. Maybe it just looks easy. Social media never shows grief. It doesn't show reflection. It doesn't show confusion. It shows highlights. And maybe what I'm seeing is the highlight reel of her coping, because moving on quickly doesn't always mean you didn't care. Sometimes it means you can't sit still with pain. Sometimes it means you need distraction to avoid accountability. Sometimes it means you'd rather build something new than examine why the last thing broke. But none of that makes it easier to watch, because while she's building new memories, I'm still dismantling old ones. I'm still processing the last conversation, still remembering the way she used to look at me, still trying to figure out when it started fading. And that imbalance makes you feel like you lost twice. You lost the relationship, and you lost the race to move on. And I hate that it feels like a race, because healing shouldn't be competitive. But when someone replaces you in a week, it feels like you're the only one still standing in the wreckage, like she walked away from the crash without even looking back, and you're still checking for broken pieces. What hurts even more is knowing I didn't have a backup. I didn't have someone lined up. I didn't have a just in case. When we ended, it was just me in the silence, and I chose to sit in it, not because I wanted to suffer, but because I respect what we had enough to process it properly. So when she jumped into something new that fast, it felt like I was the only one honoring the history, like I was the only one treating it like it mattered. And that's a lonely feeling, to believe something was significant and watch the other person treat it like it was temporary. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe she didn't replace me. Maybe she replaced the feeling of being alone. Maybe she replaced the discomfort. Maybe she replaced the emptiness, because some people don't know how to sit with themselves after something ends. They need noise. They need attention. They need someone new to prove they're still wanted, and if that's the case, then her moving on in a week says more about her relationship with silence than it does about my value. Still, that doesn't stop the thoughts, because at night, logic fades and emotion gets loud, and in those moments, it feels like I wasn't enough. Like if I had been better, stronger, more exciting, more something, she wouldn't have moved on that fast. But I have to remind myself, you can be enough for someone and still not be there forever. You can love someone deeply and still not be what they're built to keep. And if she could replace me in 7 days, then maybe I wasn't meant to stay in her life long term. Maybe I was a lesson. Maybe she was mine. But what I refuse to accept is that I was insignificant, because I know how I loved, I know how I showed up, I know how I committed, and those things don't become meaningless just because someone else moved quickly. If anything, they prove something about me, that I invest fully, that I don't keep backups, that I don't treat people like placeholders. And maybe that's rare. Maybe that's why this hurts more, because I wasn't halfway in. I was all the way in. And when you're all the way in, being replaced feels like being erased, but I'm not erased. I'm just healing at a pace that reflects depth, and depth doesn't reset in 7 days. So yeah, she replaced me in a week, but that week doesn't define my worth. It defines her coping speed. And one day when she finally slows down, she might realize you can replace a person's position, but you can't replace the way they loved you. And that's something no one swaps out in 7 days. There's a different kind of pain that comes from being replaced quickly. It's not just heartbreak, it's humiliation. And I don't mean humiliation in a loud, dramatic way. I mean the quiet kind, the kind where you sit alone thinking, how did I not see this coming? Because when someone moves on in a week, it makes you question your awareness. Were there signs I ignored? Did she emotionally detach months before I noticed? Was I holding on to something that was already slipping through my hands? And that's the part that messes with your head the most. Because now it's not just about losing her. It's about doubting yourself, your intuition, your judgment, your ability to read people. You start replaying moments that once felt normal. That random argument, that night she seemed distant, that time she picked up her phone and turned it away slightly, that period where she felt off but said she was fine. At the time, you trusted her words. Now you question everything, because if she replaced you in 7 days, your brain automatically assumes she had a head start. And whether that's true or not, the damage is the same. It makes you feel like you were the only one fully in it, like you were the only one fighting for something she had already decided to let go of. And that imbalance feels like betrayal, even if technically it wasn't, because the emotional timing didn't match. You were still invested, she was already transitioning, and that creates this gap, a painful one, where you're grieving something she already processed, or avoided, or replaced, and it makes you feel late, like you're the last one to realize the relationship was over. And I hate that feeling, because I don't like feeling behind. I don't like feeling like I was operating with outdated information. I don't like feeling like I was loving someone who had already emotionally packed their bags. But maybe that's the reality. Maybe the breakup wasn't the beginning of her detachment. Maybe it was the end of it. Maybe she had already done her grieving while I was still trying to fix things. And that realization hurts in a different way. Because now it's not just that she moved on fast, it's that she moved on before I even knew we were done. And I'm stuck here wondering when it actually ended. Was it weeks before the breakup? Months? Did she slowly disconnect while I was still showing up? Because that's the part nobody prepares you for. The possibility that you were loving someone who was already halfway gone. And if that's true, then I wasn't replaced in a week. I was replaced long before that. I just didn't know it yet. But here's the thing, I'm slowly starting to understand. Even if she emotionally left before I did, that doesn't make me weak. It doesn't make me naive. It means I was committed. It means I was still trying. It means I was operating in good faith. And I'd rather be the one who stayed genuine than the one who quietly exited without saying it, because I know how I loved. I didn't keep options open. I didn't emotionally detach while pretending everything was fine. I didn't start building something new while something old was still alive. When I was in it fully. And if she replaced me in a week, then that says something about her capacity to detach, not about my capacity to matter. Still, that week will probably always sting, not because of the new guy, but because of what it symbolized. How quickly someone can shift focus, how fast attention can be redirected, how easy it can look to replace what felt permanent. But maybe permanence isn't about how long something lasts, maybe it's about how deeply it was felt. And if I'm still here processing it while she moved on fast, then maybe I was the one who felt it deeper. And that doesn't make me the loser. It makes me the one who actually experienced it. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase what I gave, and I refuse to let her timeline rewrite my value, because being replaced quickly hurts, but being genuine never does. There's something else that hurts about being replaced in a week. It makes you question whether you were ever chosen or just convenient, because if someone can transition that smoothly, that fast, it starts to feel like you were just occupying space, like you weren't irreplaceable, like you were temporary comfort, and nobody wants to feel like temporary comfort. I keep thinking about the way she used to look at me, the way she said things like, I don't see myself with anyone else, the way she made it seem like what we had was rare, and now I'm sitting here wondering how rare something can really be if it can be replaced in 7 days. That's what makes it sting. Because rarity isn't supposed to be swappable, depth isn't supposed to be interchangeable. If something is special, it's supposed to leave a gap when it's gone. But her life doesn't look like there was a gap, it looks filled immediately. And that creates this internal conflict. Was I overestimating my importance? Did I romanticize something that was lighter to her than it was to me? Because when you care deeply, you assume the other person feels the same weight. You assume the attachment is mutual. You assume the history matters equally, but being replaced quickly makes you realize something uncomfortable. Not everyone feels at the same depth you do. Some people attach fast and detach faster. Some people build quickly and rebuild quicker. Some people don't see relationships as something sacred. They see them as something seasonal. And maybe that's the difference between us. Maybe I treat connection like something that deserves reverence, and she treats it like something that deserves momentum, because momentum doesn't stop, it just redirects, and that's exactly what she did. She redirected. The same attention, the same affection, the same emotional energy, just different recipient, and that's hard to swallow because it makes you feel like the container didn't matter, just the feeling. But here's the part I'm slowly realizing. If someone can redirect their attachment that fast, then maybe what they were attached to wasn't you. It was the feeling of being with someone. And that's not the same thing. There's a difference between loving a person and loving the experience of not being alone. And if she loved the experience more than she loved me, then of course she could replace me quickly, because she wasn't replacing a soul connection, she was replacing the role. And that hurts, but it also clarifies, because I don't want to be someone's role. I don't want to be someone's emotional placeholder. I don't want to be someone's for now. I want to be chosen with intention, held with depth, missed when I'm gone. And if she could swap me out in a week, then maybe I wasn't held the way I thought I was. But that doesn't mean I wasn't valuable. It just means she didn't hold me deeply. And those are two different things. Still, There's something about the speed that keeps echoing. 7 days. It makes it feel like I didn't leave a mark, like I didn't leave impact, like I didn't leave space. But I know that's not true because impact isn't measured by how long someone stays single. It's measured by what they learned, what they felt, what they carry forward. And even if she doesn't feel it now, one day when the distraction fades, when the excitement settles, when she's sitting in quiet, you might finally process what she skipped, and by then I won't be waiting. Because here's what I'm starting to understand. Being replaced quickly doesn't mean you were insignificant. It means the other person couldn't sit with loss, and loss reveals maturity. If I'm still here processing, still reflecting, still rebuilding, then I'm not behind, I'm just doing it properly. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase who I was, and I refuse to let her timeline determine my value, because I wasn't just someone she dated, I was someone who showed up fully, and that doesn't become meaningless just because someone else showed up faster. She replaced me in a week, but that week says more about her relationship with discomfort than it does about my worth. There's another layer to this that I don't talk about out loud. Anger, not loud anger, not screaming or crashing out. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest when you realize how easily someone redirected what you treated like sacred. Because I stayed loyal, I stayed committed, I stayed focused, and she moved on in 7 days. That makes you question fairness. It makes you feel like you played the game honestly while someone else was already preparing their next move. And I hate that it feels like a game because I never approached it like one. When I was with her, I wasn't scanning the room for upgrades, I wasn't entertaining backups, I wasn't lining up options just in case. I was in it, fully, and now I'm sitting here realizing she either wasn't or she detached long before I knew. And that's what builds resentment. The idea that I was emotionally present while she was emotionally preparing. Because now it feels like I was loyal to a version of her that didn't exist anymore, like I was committed to something she had already mentally ended, and that realization stings. But here's where it shifts, because the anger starts turning into clarity. If she could replace me that quickly, then she was already disconnecting. And if she was already disconnecting, then the relationship wasn't as mutual as I believed. And if it wasn't mutual, then I wasn't losing someone who was fully invested. I was losing someone who was already halfway out. That doesn't make it hurt less, but it reframes it, because now it's not about me being not enough. It's about her not being anchored. Anchored people don't drift that fast. Anchored people don't swap attachments like playlists. Anchored people sit with loss, and if she didn't sit with it, then maybe she never held it deeply, and that realization hurts, but it also frees me, because I don't want someone who can replace depth with distraction. I don't want someone who needs constant attention to feel stable. I want someone who values history, who respects connection, who understands that what you build with someone isn't disposable. And if she replaced me in a week, then maybe I was disposable to her. But that doesn't mean I'm disposable in general. It just means she wasn't built to keep me. And there's a difference. Still, there's a part of me that wonders if she ever thinks about it, if she ever pauses, if she ever compares, if she ever realizes how fast she moved, but I can't live in that space, because waiting for someone to feel what you felt is a trap, and I refuse to trap myself in her timeline. 7 days, that's how fast she moved, but here's the truth. I'd rather take my time healing than rush into something new just to prove I can. I'd rather rebuild properly than distract myself temporarily, because I know what I gave, and I know how I showed up. And I know I don't need to rush into something new to validate that. She replaced me in a week, but I'm rebuilding myself at a pace that lasts, and that's not weakness, that's depth. You know what else being replaced in a week does? It makes you question whether you were ever truly seen. Because if someone really sees you, Your patterns, your effort, your loyalty, your depth, they don't just slide into something new like you were a temporary rental. They feel the absence, they sit in it, they notice the difference, and I keep wondering if she noticed the quiet after I stopped calling, if she noticed the lack of consistency I used to bring, if she noticed that the stability I provided isn't something you just duplicate overnight, or if she just filled the silence so fast that there was no space to notice at all. That's what hurt, the possibility that I wasn't deeply registered, that I was experienced but not understood, because there's a difference between being with someone and truly knowing them. And when someone replaces you quickly, it feels like they never fully knew the weight of what they had. It feels like they liked the experience of you, not the essence of you, and I can handle someone not choosing me. But it's harder to handle feeling like I was easy to move past. I keep thinking about how careful I was, how intentional I was, how I didn't play games, how I didn't keep backups, how when things got hard, I leaned in instead of pulling away. And in the end, it feels like none of that slowed her down. 7 days. That number keeps echoing like a clock ticking in reverse, because for me, 7 days after a breakup feels raw. It feels heavy. It feels like I'm still adjusting to the silence, but for her, 7 days was enough to build something new. And that contrast makes you feel like you loved harder than you were loved. And that's a lonely realization, because loving harder isn't something you brag about. It's something you feel when the other person moves on faster, and you're left holding the emotional weight. But here's what I'm starting to see clearly. Just because she moved on quickly doesn't mean she processed it deeply. Speed isn't strength. Speed can be avoidance. Speed can be distraction. Speed can be ego protection. Sometimes people rush into something new not because the old thing meant nothing, but because it meant too much. Because sitting alone would force them to face what they lost, and not everyone is strong enough to sit in that kind of silence, and maybe I am. Maybe the reason I'm still here thinking, reflecting, feeling is because I actually let it hit me. I didn't numb it, I didn't immediately replace it, I didn't run from it, I sat with it, and sitting with pain requires maturity. It requires discipline, it requires emotional depth. So maybe this isn't about me being less valuable, maybe it's about me being more capable of processing, and that's not weakness, that's growth. Still, there's something about knowing she's creating new memories that stings, because those were supposed to be ours. The random laughs, the new places, the inside jokes. Now someone else gets that version of her, and I have to let go of the idea that it was only meant for me. And that's hard, but here's the truth I can't ignore anymore. If she could replace me in a week, then I was loving someone who wasn't built to stay long term. Because people who are built to stay don't detach that fast. They don't redirect that easily. They don't swap depth for novelty overnight. And I don't want someone who can treat connection like it's interchangeable. I want someone who understands the weight of history, who understands that what you build with someone isn't disposable, who understands that real attachment doesn't reset in 7 days. So yeah, she replaced me in a week, but I'm rebuilding myself in a way that lasts longer than a rebound ever will. And when I look back at this one day, I won't just remember the hurt, I'll remember the clarity, because being replaced quickly doesn't mean you were insignificant. It means the other person wasn't anchored, and I refuse to confuse someone else's instability with my lack of worth. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase what I was. And one day, when I'm with someone who values depth the way I do, this week won't define me. It'll just be proof that I was never meant to stay where I was easily replaced. At some point, the hurt turns into something quieter. Not lighter, just quieter. Because you can only replay 7 days so many times before your brain gets tired of the echo. And when the noise slows down, clarity starts creeping in. I started asking myself a different question. Not why did she replace me so fast, but why am I measuring my value through her speed? because that's what I was doing without realizing it. I was using her timeline as a mirror. If she moved on quickly, I must not have mattered deeply. If she looks happy, I must have been replaceable. If she didn't hesitate, I must not have left impact. But that logic is flawed. Her speed is not a measurement of my depth. Her distraction is not a reflection of my worth. Her ability to move forward quickly doesn't erase the way I showed up. And once I started separating those things, something shifted, because I know how I loved. I know I was intentional. I know I was loyal. I know I didn't treat what we had like it was temporary. So if she did, that says something about her capacity, not my value. And I had to stop turning her coping style into my insecurity, because that's what I was doing. I was letting her rebound rewrite my confidence. I was letting her quick transition convince me I was forgettable. But forgettable doesn't leave you reflecting. Forgettable doesn't leave you rebuilding. Forgettable doesn't leave you questioning your own growth. What we had meant something, even if she chose not to sit in that meaning. And maybe that's the difference between us. I process, she replaces. I reflect, she redirects. I sit with the silence, she fills it. And neither is necessarily wrong, but one builds depth, the other builds distraction, and depth always wins in the long run. Because distraction fades, novelty fades, rebounds lose their adrenaline, and when that happens, whatever was avoided eventually resurfaces, and by then I won't be stuck in the same place, because while she rushed forward, I rebuilt properly, and rebuilding properly takes longer, but it lasts longer too. 7 days might have been enough for her to feel okay, but it wasn't enough for me to lose myself, and that's what matters. So yeah, she replaced me in a week, and for a while that felt like proof that I wasn't enough, proof that I was temporary, proof that I was easy to move past. But now it feels like proof of something else, proof that I love deeply, proof that I don't detach easily, proof that I don't treat connection like it's disposable. Because if I could have replaced her that fast and didn't, that says something. It says I value what I build. It says I respect history. It says I don't jump into something new just to soothe my ego. And I'd rather be the one who heals slowly than the one who forgets quickly. Because forgetting quickly doesn't mean you're strong. Sometimes it just means you're avoiding, and I don't want to avoid. I want to grow. I want to understand what worked, what didn't, what I tolerated, what I ignored. I want to rebuild my confidence without attaching it to someone else's timeline. She replaced me in a week, but she didn't replace my character. She didn't replace my loyalty. She didn't replace my ability to love fully. And one day, someone is going to experience that depth and recognize it immediately. Not treat it like a placeholder, not treat it like a phase, but treat it like something rare. Because rare things don't get swapped in 7 days. They get protected, so maybe this wasn't about me being replaced. Maybe it was about me being redirected away from someone who could move on that quickly towards someone who won't. 7 days hurt, but it also clarified. I don't want to be in a position where I can be replaced that easily ever again. And the only way to guarantee that is to choose someone who understands the weight of what they're holding. And next time, I will. It will ruin your life if you don't learn how to recognize it for what it really is. Not temptation, not desire, not even attraction. Lust is a signal. It's like a check engine light flashing on your dashboard, warning you that something deeper is wrong under the surface. And most people don't want to hear that. They'd rather numb it, feed it, distract themselves with it, instead of asking why it showed up in the first place. Because here's the truth. When lust starts controlling your thoughts, your habits, your attention, it usually means you're lacking something real in your life. Not sex, not validation, intimacy. And intimacy doesn't always mean romance. That's where a lot of people get it twisted. Intimacy can be connection. It can be purpose. It can be faith. It can be feeling seen by people who actually care about you. It can be having someone you can talk to honestly without pretending you're okay. When those things are missing, lust steps in as a cheap replacement. Gives you a temporary hit, a moment of feeling wanted, a moment of escape, but once that moment passes, you're left emptier than before. That's why lust never satisfies. It promises relief, but delivers restlessness. You indulge, and instead of feeling fulfilled, you feel more hollow. more disconnected, more frustrated with yourself, and then the cycle repeats. Because you're not fixing the problem, you're feeding the symptom. The craving itself isn't the enemy. The lack of awareness is. Lust shows up when you're avoiding something, when you're lonely, when you're stressed, when you're disconnected from yourself. It's your mind trying to fill a void without doing the work to understand why that void exists in the first place. And the more you indulge it without reflection, the more it delays your healing. You tell yourself it's harmless, that it's normal, that everyone does it. But deep down, you know when something isn't sitting right with your spirit. You know when it's no longer about desire and more about escape. This isn't about shame, it's about honesty. Lust is an indicator, a warning sign. A moment where you need to pause and ask yourself, what am I really craving right now? Connection? Comfort? Meaning? Peace? Because until you figure that out, lust will keep pulling you further away from yourself instead of closer to who you're meant to be. Most people don't want to admit this part, but lust usually shows up when you're feeling empty, not when you're fulfilled, when your life feels aligned, when you're grounded, when you have purpose and connection. Lust doesn't scream as loud. It might knock, but it doesn't take over. It only takes control when there's space inside you that hasn't been filled with anything meaningful. That's why lust hits hardest late at night, when you're alone, when the noise dies down, and there's nothing left to distract you from your thoughts. That's when your mind starts looking for something, anything, to feel good for a moment. And lust offers that shortcut. No effort, no vulnerability, no risk of rejection, just instant stimulation. But shortcuts always come with a cost. The more you use lust as an escape, the harder it becomes to sit with yourself. You start avoiding silence, avoiding stillness, avoiding the questions you don't want to answer. You tell yourself you're just satisfying a desire, but really you're training your brain to seek relief instead of growth, comfort instead of clarity. And over time, that changes you. It dulls your motivation. It weakens your discipline. It distorts how you view people, turning them into objects instead of humans. It lowers your tolerance for real connection because real intimacy requires patience, presence, and effort. Things lust never asks of you. This is why people who live in lust often feel stuck, not because they're bad or weak, but because they're constantly numbing the very discomfort that could push them to grow. Pain becomes something to escape instead of something to understand, and healing gets postponed again and again. You have to learn to pause when the urge hits, not to fight it with shame, but to question it. Ask yourself what you're actually missing in that moment. Is it connection, purpose, rest, direction? Because the urge is information, and if you listen to it instead of obeying it, it can lead you to what actually needs attention in your life. Lust loses power the moment you become aware of it. Here's where it gets uncomfortable but important. Lust isn't just about what you want. It's about what you're avoiding. Most people don't struggle with lust because they're overly sexual. They struggle because they're disconnected from themselves, from their purpose, from real relationships, from meaning. When you don't feel fulfilled in your day-to-day life, your mind looks for stimulation, something intense enough to make you forget how empty things feel. Lust is powerful because it hijacks your attention. It pulls you out of the present moment and into fantasy. And fantasy is easier than reality. Fantasy doesn't ask you to change. Reality does. That's why lust becomes a habit, not because it feels good, but because it distracts you from feeling bad. It numbs loneliness, it masks insecurity, it gives you a false sense of control when everything else in your life feels uncertain. But every time you choose that escape, you reinforce the idea that you can't handle discomfort without running from it. And that slowly chips away at you. You start feeling weaker mentally, less disciplined, less confident. You promise yourself you'll stop, then you don't. And now it's not just lust anymore, it's guilt, shame, self-disappointment. You start questioning your self-control, your character, your ability to change, all because you never addressed the root issue in the first place. The problem isn't desire. Desire is human. The problem is unchanneled desire. Desire without direction turns into self-destruction. When your energy isn't going into building something meaningful, it leaks into things that drain you instead. This is why people who overcome lust don't just resist harder, they replace it, they build structure, they strengthen their spirit, they deepen their relationships, they find something worth committing to that gives them purpose beyond momentary pleasure. Lust thrives in isolation, in boredom, in lack of direction. But when your life has meaning, when your days are intentional, when your spirit feels aligned, lust doesn't have much room to grow. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops controlling you. Another reason lust has so much power is because it disguises itself as confidence. It makes you feel wanted, desired, in control. For a brief moment, it tricks you into thinking you're fulfilled. But once that moment fades, you're left with the same questions, the same restlessness, the same hollow feeling you were trying to escape in the first place. That's how you know it's not real fulfillment. Real fulfillment doesn't vanish the second the stimulation stops. Real fulfillment gives you peace afterward, not regret. Clarity, not confusion. Strength, not self-disgust. And over time, if you're not careful, lust can start shaping how you view yourself. You begin to associate your worth with how desired you feel instead of who you actually are. You start needing validation just to feel okay. And when that validation isn't there, the craving comes back stronger, not because you're weak, but because your identity is being built on something unstable. This is where self-awareness becomes everything. You have to catch yourself and ask, what am I really avoiding right now? Am I running from loneliness, from boredom, from the work I know I need to do on myself? Lust often shows up when you're avoiding growth, when you're putting off healing, when you're ignoring parts of your life that need attention. The uncomfortable truth is that growth requires sitting with discomfort, requires stillness, silence, discipline, and lust offers you an easy way out of that process. But every time you take that exit, you delay becoming the version of yourself you know you're capable of being. You don't have to be perfect. You're going to slip. You're going to struggle. That's part of being human. What matters is whether you're conscious of the pattern or blindly repeating it. Awareness alone starts breaking the cycle. Because the goal isn't to eliminate desire. Desire is natural. The goal is to stop letting desire control you, to stop letting it dictate your habits, your focus, and your future. When you do that, you don't lose pleasure, you gain freedom. Here's where things start to shift if you're willing to be honest with yourself. Lust isn't just about what you want. It's about what you're avoiding becoming. Every time you give in without thinking, you're choosing comfort over growth. And that choice, repeated enough times, slowly shapes the direction of your life. You start delaying things you know you should be doing. Goals get pushed back, discipline weakens, motivation fades. Not all at once, but subtly. You tell yourself you'll lock in tomorrow, you'll change next week, you'll get serious later. But later keeps moving, and you stay stuck in the same patterns, wondering why nothing feels different. And the worst part? Lust makes you numb to it. It gives you just enough relief to tolerate a life you know you're not fully proud of. It lowers the urgency to change, because why face the discomfort of growth when you can distract yourself instead? This is why so many people feel lost, not because they lack potential, but because they keep trading long-term fulfillment for short-term relief. And relief is never the same as peace. Relief fades, peace stays. When you start addressing the real voids in your life, lust starts losing its grip naturally. When you build structure into your days, when you commit to something bigger than yourself, when you start respecting your time, your body, your mind, when you develop a relationship with God, purpose or discipline, whatever grounds you, lust doesn't hit as hard because now you have something to protect. You realize your energy is valuable, your attention is valuable, and not everything deserves access to you. You stop feeding impulses that don't align with the future you're trying to build, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself. That's when lust stops feeling like a battle, it starts feeling like a signal. A reminder to check in with yourself, to ask, am I aligned right now? Or am I avoiding something I need to face? And every time you choose alignment over impulse, you get a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more in control. At this stage, you start realizing something important. Lust was never the root problem, it was the symptom. The real issue was disconnection. Disconnection from yourself, from purpose, from meaning, from the version of you that feels grounded and whole. Once you see that, the urge loses some of its mystery. It's no longer this uncontrollable force, it's just information. You begin to notice patterns. The urges come when you're tired, when you're bored, when you feel unaccomplished at the end of the day, when you avoided something you know you should have handled, and instead of judging yourself for it, you start listening. You ask, what am I missing right now? Rest, direction, fulfillment, human connection. This is where growth actually happens. When you suppress desire, but when you replace it. When you choose to build instead of escape. When you put energy into things that give back instead of drain you. Working on your body, your craft, your faith, your friendships. Things that leave you stronger afterward, not emptier. And the crazy part is, the more you do this, the quieter lust becomes. Not because it's gone, but because it's no longer needed to cope. You're not running from yourself anymore. You're becoming someone you respect. You start carrying yourself differently. Your confidence becomes real, not borrowed from temporary validation. You don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. You feel solid just being present, just being disciplined, just knowing you're moving in the right direction even when it's uncomfortable. That's when self-control stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like freedom. Freedom from compulsions, freedom from regret, freedom from waking up feeling disappointed in yourself. You're no longer controlled by every urge that passes through your mind. You won't be perfect. Nobody is, but you'll be conscious. And consciousness changes everything, because once you're aware, you get to choose, and choosing growth over impulse again and again is how you reclaim your life. There's a moment where you finally understand that discipline isn't about denying yourself pleasure. It's about choosing a better one, a deeper one. The kind that doesn't disappear the second the screen goes dark or the urge passes, the kind that stays with you when you're alone with your thoughts and you can actually respect the person staring back at you. You start realizing how much time and energy you were leaking, hours, focus, mental clarity, all going towards something that never loved you back, never built you up, never moved your life forward. And once you see that clearly, it's hard to unsee it. You begin protecting your mind the same way you'd protect your body. You stop feeding it things that weaken it. This is where restraint becomes self-respect. You're no longer saying no because you're scared. You're saying no because you finally understand the cost of saying yes. You've felt the emptiness after. You've lived the fog. You've experienced how indulging too much slowly disconnects you from your ambition, your relationships, your purpose. And something else changes too. You start seeing people differently, not as objects, not as outlets, but as humans again, with depth, with emotion, with stories. Real connection stops feeling boring. It starts feeling rare, valuable, something worth protecting instead of rushing. That's when intimacy starts to return in healthier forms. Real conversations, genuine friendships, moments of stillness that don't need to be filled, a sense of closeness with yourself that you didn't even realize you were missing. And once you taste that, lust loses its grip even more, because now you're building something, a life you don't need to escape from, a version of yourself you're proud of. When that happens, the urge doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls you. It passes like a thought, like a wave. At the end of the day, lust only has power when you don't understand it. When you finally see it for what it is, a signal, not a solution, it stops running your life. You stop treating it like something you must obey and start treating it like something you observe, and that shift changes everything. You realize you don't need to be perfect to be disciplined. You just need to be honest. Honest about what you're missing, honest about what you're avoiding, honest about who you want to become, because every urge is an invitation, not to indulge, but to check in. Once you start responding instead of reacting, you regain control. You stop letting momentary desire dictate long-term direction. You stop trading peace for pleasure. You stop delaying your growth for comfort, and slowly, your life begins to align with the values you claim to have. Lust didn't ruin you. Revealed the places where healing was needed, the moments where connection was missing, the areas of your life that needed structure, purpose, and depth. And once you start filling those spaces intentionally, lust no longer screams for attention. It fades into the background. You become more present, more focused, more grounded. You don't feel constantly pulled in 100 directions anymore. You know what matters, you know what doesn't, and you act accordingly. This isn't about becoming cold or denying desire. It's about mastering yourself, about building a life where your mind works for you, not against you, where your choices reflect your values, where you don't need escape because you're finally moving towards something real. And when you get there, you'll look back and realize something important. The urge was never the enemy. Ignoring the message was. I don't think I ever wanted too much. I didn't need perfection. I didn't need constant attention. I didn't need someone to save me. I just wanted to be cared for. I wanted someone who noticed when I went quiet. Someone who checked in without being asked. Someone who didn't treat my presence like something optional. But every time I tried to explain that, it sounded like neediness, like I was asking for too much. So I stayed quiet. I accepted less. I told myself I was independent enough to not need reassurance. But deep down, that wasn't true. I wasn't asking to be obsessed over. I wasn't asking to be put on a pedestal. I was asking to matter, to feel like my absence would be noticed, like my feelings would be considered, like I didn't have to earn basic care by being easy, understanding, or low maintenance. And every time I didn't get that, I told myself it was fine, that this is just how people are, that expecting care is unrealistic, that I should be grateful for whatever effort showed up, but wanting to be cared for doesn't make you weak. It means you're human. It means you want a connection where effort is mutual and presence isn't forced. And the hardest part is realizing how long you stayed in places where you felt invisible just because you didn't want to seem like you needed too much. I didn't want someone to fix me. I just wanted someone who cared enough to stay aware of me. At some point, wanting to be cared for turns into accepting the bare minimum. You stop asking questions, stop expressing needs, stop pointing out what hurts, because every time you do, it feels like you're asking for too much. So you adjust, you get excited over replies that should be normal, you appreciate effort that should be consistent, you thank people for things they do effortlessly if they truly cared, and you tell yourself this is just how love works. But deep down you feel it, the imbalance, the quiet disappointment, the way you're always the one paying attention. You're not asking for grand gestures, you're asking for awareness, to be checked on, to be considered, to feel like your emotions aren't an inconvenience, but instead you keep shrinking your expectations to fit what people are willing to give. You call it being low maintenance, being understanding, being independent, when really you're just afraid that if you ask for more, you'll lose what little you have. And that's the part that hurts, because you don't want more love, you just want the love that's already there to show up consistently. You don't want to beg for care, you want it to be natural. And the longer you settle, the more you start questioning yourself. Am I too sensitive? Am I needy? Am I wrong for wanting this? But wanting to be cared for was never the problem. Staying where you're barely noticed is. Pretending you don't need care slowly disconnects you from yourself. You start ignoring your own feelings before anyone else can. You tell yourself you're fine even when you're not. You swallow disappointment and call it maturity, because admitting you want care feels risky. It feels like giving someone power to decide whether you're too much, so you choose silence instead. You become the easy one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't ask for reassurance or consistency or emotional presence. And people like that version of you because it asks for nothing, but inside something starts to dull. You feel lonely even when you're not alone. You feel unseen even when someone's there. You start questioning whether your needs are even valid anymore. That's when you know you've gone too far. Not by wanting care, but by convincing yourself you don't deserve it. You weren't meant to love people from a distance. You weren't meant to be strong at the cost of being felt. Care isn't weakness. Wanting it isn't dependency. It's connection. And the moment you deny yourself that truth, you don't just lose it from others, you lose it from yourself. There's a moment where it finally hits you. You've been caring for everyone else while no one was really caring for you. You remember how often you checked in, how often you noticed shifts in tone, how often you adjusted yourself to make things easier for others, and then you look back and realize how rarely anyone did that for you. No one asked if you were okay when you went quiet, no one noticed when your energy changed, no one slowed down enough to really see you, and that realization hurts in a quiet, heavy way, because you weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking to be prioritized above everything. You were asking for reciprocity. To feel like your presence mattered as much as you made theirs matter. That's when the exhaustion sets in. Not physical tiredness, emotional fatigue. The kind that comes from always being the one who cares first, who understands more, who gives grace even when it costs you. You start wondering how you became so good at holding space for people who never learned how to hold it for you. And the truth is uncomfortable. You taught them it was okay to lean on you without leaning back, to receive care without returning it, not because you wanted imbalance, but because you didn't want to feel abandoned. And realizing that is both painful and clarifying, because it shows you something important. You weren't asking for too much, you were just asking it from the wrong people. That realization changes how you choose people. You stop being impressed by words. You stop getting attached to potential. You stop mistaking attention for care, because now you know the difference. Care looks like consistency. It looks like remembering. It looks like showing up even when it's not convenient. So you start paying attention to who checks in without being prompted, who notices when you're off, who doesn't make you explain why you need what you need. And at first that makes your circle smaller. You walk away from people you once would have stayed for. You stop overextending. You stop being the only one holding things together. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you finally care about yourself too. You don't chase care now. You don't hint at it. You don't downplay your needs to make someone comfortable. You let people show you how they show up. And if they don't, you don't argue with it. You don't try to teach them how to care. You accept the information and move accordingly, because wanting to be cared for isn't a flaw. It's a boundary. And the moment you start honoring it, you realize something important. You'd rather be alone than be surrounded and still feel unseen. Choosing yourself feels lonely at first, not because you made the wrong choice, but because you stopped filling the silence with people who never really saw you. You notice the absence quickly, the lack of constant conversation, the quiet that comes when you're no longer overgiving just to stay connected. And that quiet can be uncomfortable because for a long time, being needed made you feel valued. Being available made you feel important. Being the one who cared most made you feel like you belonged. Now you don't do that anymore. You don't reach out first every time. You don't check in when it's never returned. You don't hold space for people who won't hold it for you. And yes, that leaves gaps, but those gaps feel different than the loneliness you had before. Before you were lonely even when surrounded by people. Now you're alone but at peace. There's no resentment building, no quiet disappointment, no wondering why you're not enough. Just space to breathe, space to feel what you feel, space to rebuild a relationship with yourself that isn't based on neglect. You start realizing that loneliness with self-respect is lighter than connection without care. And once you taste that peace, it's hard to go back, because you finally understand being cared for starts with not abandoning yourself anymore. Learning how to receive care is harder than giving it. That part surprised me. I was always good at showing up, at checking in, at being thoughtful without being asked. But when someone tried to do that for me, I didn't know how to relax into it. I questioned it. I downplayed it. I felt uncomfortable being the one who was noticed, because for so long, care felt conditional, like something you earned by being useful, easy, understanding. So when someone offers it freely, without you proving anything, your first instinct is to brace yourself. You wait for it to disappear, you look for the catch, you assume it won't last, and that's not because you don't want care, it's because you're not used to it being consistent. You're used to being the giver, the supporter, the one who adapts. So receiving feels vulnerable in a way giving never did. It means letting someone see you without performing, letting yourself need without apologizing, letting care exist without questioning your worthiness of it. That takes unlearning. It takes time to believe that you don't have to exhaust yourself to deserve tenderness. And I'm still learning that, still reminding myself that care doesn't have to be chased, earned, or negotiated. Sometimes it's just there, and allowing it in is the bravest thing you can do after spending so long surviving without it. At some point, you stop asking why people don't care. You stop replaying conversations, stop analyzing tone, stop wondering what you could have done differently, because that question only keeps you stuck chasing explanations instead of truth. So you ask a different question: who actually shows up for me? Not who says they care, not who means well, not who shows interest when it's easy, but who checks in consistently, who notices when you're quiet, who doesn't disappear when you need space or reassurance or time. And the answer is usually smaller than you expect: fewer people, less noise, more clarity. That realization hurts, but it also simplifies everything. You stop pouring into people who only take. You stop investing in connections that leave you feeling unseen. You don't make announcements. You don't explain your shift. You just move differently. You protect your energy. You reserve your care for those who return it naturally. And slowly you stop feeling desperate to be noticed because you're no longer surrounding yourself with people who make you feel invisible. Care stops being something you beg for and starts being something you recognize. And that's when you finally understand being cared for isn't about convincing people to treat you better. It's about choosing the ones who already do. Wanting to be cared for doesn't make you needy. It makes you honest. Needy is asking someone to fill a void they didn't create. Needy is expecting one person to carry everything for you. But wanting care, that's wanting reciprocity. That's wanting your effort to be met, your presence to be valued, your emotions to be considered. You're not asking someone to revolve their life around you. You're asking them to see you. And somewhere along the way, you were taught that asking for that was too much. So you minimized yourself. You softened your needs. You told yourself independence meant not needing anything from anyone. But that wasn't strength. That was self-denial. Because even the strongest people need to feel cared for sometimes. Need to feel noticed. Need to feel like their existence matters to someone else. You don't want care because you can't survive without it. You want it because connection is part of being human. And the moment you stop shaming yourself for wanting that, everything changes. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop pretending you're okay with being overlooked. You stop accepting crumbs just to feel included. You realize something important. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong people. At the end of all this, I realized something simple. Wanting to be cared for is not something I negotiate anymore. I'm done explaining why it matters, done justifying why I feel hurt, done shrinking my needs so someone else can stay comfortable. Care is not a bonus, it's not extra, it's not something you earn by being quiet, easy, or low maintenance. It's the baseline. If someone doesn't notice me, doesn't check in, doesn't consider how their actions affect me, then they don't get access to me. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, out of self-respect. I spent too long convincing myself that wanting care made me weak, too long accepting half presence and calling it connection, too long staying where I felt invisible, just to avoid being alone. I'm not doing that anymore. I don't need to be chased. I don't need to be obsessed over. I just need to be considered. And if someone can't do that naturally, without me begging, hinting, or explaining, then they're not my person. Because the right people won't make you feel guilty for wanting to matter. They won't make care feel conditional. They won't make you question whether you're asking for too much. They'll just show up. And until that happens, I'd rather stand alone with my needs intact than sit beside someone who makes me feel unseen. I didn't want too much, I just wanted to be cared for. And now I care enough about myself to never accept less again. It's always at night when everything hits at once. Your room gets quiet, your phone is dry, everyone's asleep, and suddenly your mind keeps replaying everything. You try to forget the laughs, the old texts, the what-ifs. You start missing people you swore you moved on from. You start feeling things you buried a long time ago. And it's not even about wanting them back. It's about wishing things just ended differently. Wishing you said more, or nothing at all. You ever lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling like the past is louder than the present? It's like Aaron from Attack on Titan, haunted by the weight of what's already gone, but still pretending to move forward like it doesn't hurt. And the worst part? You can't talk to anyone about it because it's 2 a.m., and no one would get it anyway. But let me remind you this. Those memories, they're just echoes. They feel loud now, but they don't define you. You lived through them, and you're still here, and yeah, it hurts, but that means you cared. And caring, that's not weakness. That's proof you're human. So breathe. You won't feel like this forever. It always gets heavier at night. Not during the day when there's noise, distractions, people moving around. It's when everything finally shuts off. When your room is still, your phone hasn't buzzed in hours, and the world feels like it forgot about you. That's when your thoughts stop waiting their turn. Your mind starts pulling things out of storage you didn't ask for. Old conversations, screenshots you never deleted, Moments you thought you were over until they show up uninvited. Tell yourself you've moved on, and maybe you have. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It just means learning how to live with what still lingers. You don't even want them back. That's the confusing part. You just wish things had ended cleaner, wish you explained yourself better, or maybe wish you stayed quiet instead of saying too much. You replay scenarios that can't be fixed, trying to rewrite endings that are already locked in. You lie there staring at the ceiling, feeling like the past is louder than the life you're living right now, like everything that mattered before is screaming for attention, while the present barely whispers. You wonder why it still affects you, why it still sneaks up on you when you thought you were stronger than this. And the worst part is the timing. Too late to text anyone, too late to explain how heavy your chest feels, too late to ask for reassurance without feeling dramatic. So you just sit with it, alone, letting it hit you in waves. It's like carrying something invisible all day, and at night you finally feel the full weight of it. You act fine, you move forward, but inside, there's still grief for versions of life that never happened, for people who changed, for moments that ended before you were ready. But here's what matters. Those memories aren't commands, they're echoes. They sound loud in the quiet, but they don't control where you're going. They don't erase the fact that you survived them. They don't cancel the future you haven't lived yet. If it hurts, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you felt deeply. It means something mattered to you. And caring isn't something to be ashamed of, even when it leaves scars. So breathe. Let the night pass. You won't always feel like this, and one day the quiet won't feel so heavy anymore. There's a certain kind of loneliness that only shows up at night. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from remembering when you weren't, when someone used to be a constant, a voice you could reach for without thinking, a presence that made the quiet feel safe instead of heavy. At night, you realize how much space they used to fill. Now that space just exists, unoccupied, untouched. You don't want to fill it with anyone else because it doesn't feel right yet. So you sit with it, even though it aches. Your mind starts drifting into the what-ifs. What if I had said things differently? What if I stayed quiet instead of reacting? What if I left sooner? What if I tried harder? You run through 100 alternate endings, knowing none of them change reality, but somehow your brain keeps trying anyway. That's the trap of nighttime thinking. It convinces you that if you replay the past enough times, you'll finally find peace in it. But peace doesn't live there anymore. All that's left are lessons and memories, and sometimes even those feel too loud. You start feeling behind in life, like everyone else is moving forward while you're stuck unpacking things you never asked to carry. You scroll through your phone, watching people live, love, laugh, post highlights, and you wonder why your heart feels so heavy when everyone else seems fine. But comparison at night is dangerous. You're seeing everyone else's daylight while you're stuck in your midnight, and that will always feel unfair. What you don't see is how many people are lying awake just like you, staring at ceilings, replaying moments, trying to make peace with things that didn't turn out the way they hoped. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're processing, you're grieving, you're letting go in real time, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. And slowly, very slowly, these nights will change. They won't disappear, but they won't crush you either. The memories will still come, but they won't steal your breath. The quiet will start feeling less empty and more calm. You won't always feel haunted by the past. One night, you'll realize you're thinking about tomorrow instead of yesterday. Eventually, you start noticing that the nights don't hit the same every time. Some nights still hurt, yeah, but other nights feel quieter in a different way. Not empty, just still. And that's when you realize something is slowly shifting inside you, even if you didn't notice it during the day. You begin to understand that missing someone doesn't always mean you want them back. Sometimes it just means they were part of a chapter that mattered, a chapter that shaped you. And endings like that don't disappear quietly. They linger, they echo, not because you're stuck, but because you lived it fully. At night, you start reflecting less on them and more on yourself, on how much you've changed since then, on how certain things you tolerated before you'd never accept now, on how some versions of you had to break so newer ones could exist. And that realization is bittersweet, because growth often comes wrapped in loss. You realize that the pain isn't pointless. It taught you boundaries. It taught you what effort looks like when it's real. It taught you how to spot the difference between attention and intention. Those lessons didn't come cheap. They weren't wasted either. There are still moments when the past creeps in unannounced, and a random thought tightens your chest for a second. But now, you don't spiral the way you used to. You acknowledge it, let it pass. You don't punish yourself for remembering. You don't shame yourself for caring, and that's progress. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? You start asking, what did this teach me? And that question changes everything. The nights don't feel like battles anymore. They feel like checkpoints. Moments where you check in with yourself, where you realize how far you've come even if you still have a long way to go. And one day, you'll lie in bed and realize your thoughts aren't pulling you backward anymore. They're just passing through. And for the first time in a while, the quiet won't feel heavy. It'll feel earned. There's a point where the night stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a mirror. Not one that judges you, but one that shows you who you've become. You're not the same person you were back then. You don't react the same. You don't attach the same. You don't give pieces of yourself away as easily. And while part of you misses that softness, another part of you is grateful you learned how to protect it. You start realizing that healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up all at once. It happens in quiet moments like this, when you choose not to spiral, when you choose not to reach out, when you choose to sit with your feelings instead of running from them. Those small decisions stack up, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Some nights you'll still feel that ache, that sense of loss, but it won't feel like panic anymore. It'll feel like a reminder that you loved something real, reminder that you're capable of depth. And instead of breaking you, that thought will start to ground you. You'll also start noticing how much space you've created. Space in your mind, space in your heart, space in your life. At first, that space felt terrifying, like something was missing. Now it starts to feel like potential, like room for something healthier, something calmer, something that doesn't require you to lose sleep just to feel secure. You begin trusting yourself again, trusting that you can handle whatever comes next, trusting that even if something ends, you won't fall apart the way you once did. You've already proven that to yourself night after night just by getting through. And that's the part people don't see. They don't see the growth that happens in silence. They don't see the strength it takes to sit with your thoughts and still choose to move forward. But you know, and that's enough. The night won't always feel like this. One day it'll just be night. No wait, no replay, just rest. At some point, you stop fighting the memories when they show up. You don't chase them, but you don't shove them away either. You let them pass through like background noise instead of letting them take over the whole room. That's when you realize you're not healing by force anymore. You're healing by acceptance. You accept that some nights will still feel heavier than others, that certain dates, certain places, certain songs will still stir something inside you. But now, those moments don't define your entire mood. Don't steal the whole night. They're just moments, and moments pass. You also start understanding that the past isn't trying to pull you back, just reminding you that you lived, that you felt something real, that you weren't numb, and there's something powerful about that, because numbness is easy. Feeling is brave. You stop asking yourself if you'll ever fully move on. That question slowly loses importance. Instead, you start asking, am I okay right now? And most nights, the answer becomes yes. Not perfect, not amazing, but okay. And that's enough. You notice how your thoughts begin drifting toward things ahead of you. Plans, goals, small things you're looking forward to. First, it surprises you. Like, when did my mind start doing this? But that's how healing works. It sneaks up on you, one quiet night at a time. And even when the past visits, it doesn't feel like a threat anymore. It feels like a chapter you've already read. One that mattered. One that changed you. Not one you need to reread every night to understand. You're learning how to rest without carrying everything with you, how to sleep without replaying endings, how to let the present exist without being overshadowed by what's already gone, and that's progress. Whether you recognize it yet or not, there's a quiet confidence that starts forming in you after all those nights. It doesn't come from feeling happy all the time. It comes from knowing you can sit with discomfort and still be okay. You've already faced the worst parts of your thoughts in the dark, and they didn't destroy you. That realization changes how you move through life. You stop being afraid of the quiet. Silence doesn't feel like abandonment anymore. It feels neutral, sometimes even comforting. You don't need constant noise or validation to feel grounded. You've learned how to be alone without feeling lonely, and that's something a lot of people never figure out. You also become more honest with yourself about what you want, about what you won't tolerate again, about the kind of connections you deserve. The nights taught you that chasing what's gone only keeps you stuck, and protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. And when you think back on the people you missed, the pain isn't as sharp. There's still tenderness there, but it's softer now, less like a wound and more like a scar. Proof that something happened, but also proof that it healed. You start trusting that life doesn't end with one loss, that the world doesn't stop because something did. You realize that endings don't erase everything that came before them, and they don't block everything that comes after. They just redirect you. And one night, without any dramatic moment, you'll notice something small but important. You're tired in a normal way, not emotionally drained, not overwhelmed, just ready to rest. And as you close your eyes, you won't feel haunted, you'll feel present. And then one night, it doesn't hurt anymore. Not in the way it used to. You still remember, but the memories don't grip your chest. They don't steal your breath. They don't pull you backwards. They just exist quietly like old photographs stored away instead of wounds left open. You realize you didn't get over it all at once. You outgrew it slowly, night by night, thought by thought. You kept living even when it was hard. You kept choosing yourself even when part of you wanted to stay stuck in what was familiar. And without noticing, you built something stronger than closure. You built resilience. The nights that once felt unbearable became lessons. They taught you how to sit with yourself, how to listen instead of run, how to accept endings without needing them to make sense. And because of that, you're not afraid of feeling anymore. You're not afraid of caring. You're not afraid of loving again when the time is right. You understand now that pain doesn't mean you failed. It means you were present. It means you opened your heart in a world that doesn't always know how to hold it gently, and that's not something to regret, that's something to respect. Past no longer defines you, it informs you, it shaped you, but it doesn't own you. You carry it with wisdom now, not weight. In the quiet you once feared, it's become peace. So if tonight feels heavy, remember this. You won't always feel like this. You are moving forward even when it doesn't feel obvious. And one day you'll look back at these nights and realize they didn't break you. They built you. I didn't realize it at first, but she was keeping me around just in case things didn't work out with someone else, just in case she got bored, just in case she needed someone who would always answer. And the worst part? I thought I was actually important to her, because she would still text me, still check in, still have those moments where it felt like we had something real. So I stayed, because when someone doesn't fully leave, it gives you hope. And hope is dangerous when it's built on inconsistency. There would be days where she talked to me like I was the only person that mattered, then days where it felt like I didn't exist. And every time she came back, I told myself the same thing. Maybe this time it's real, but now I see it clearly. I wasn't her priority. I was her backup plan. The confusing part about being someone's just in case is that it doesn't feel obvious. It doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like almost consistent, almost real, almost something worth holding on to, because she never fully disappeared. She would come back, random messages, random conversations, random moments where it felt like everything was normal again. And every time that happened, it reset everything in my head. It made me forget the distance, forget the inconsistency, forget the fact that I only heard from her when it was convenient, because those moments felt real. And when something feels real, you don't question it, you lean into it. But what I didn't realize was this. She wasn't coming back because she chose me. She was coming back because she needed something. Attention, comfort, familiarity, and I was always there to give it. That's what kept me in the cycle, because I wasn't being rejected, I was being reused. The more I looked at it honestly, the more the pattern became clear. I wasn't part of her life consistently. I was part of her life conveniently. She would show up when things felt off for her, when she needed someone to talk to, when she needed to feel like someone still cared. And every time I was there, not questioning it, not hesitating, just showing up the same way I always did. Because in my head, I thought consistency would eventually turn into something real. I thought if I stayed long enough, showed enough, proved enough, she would finally choose me, but now I see it differently. I wasn't building something with her. I was maintaining a position she never fully committed to, and that's the hardest part. Realizing you were giving real effort to something that was never real in the same way. There's something subtle about being kept just in case. It doesn't destroy you all at once, it slowly drains you, because you're always in between, not fully chosen, not fully let go, just there. And that in-between space is confusing, because you don't know how to act. Do you pull back? Do you stay consistent? Do you treat it like something serious or something temporary? So you end up doing what I did. You stay, you give, you hope. Because every time she came back, it felt like confirmation that I still mattered. But what I didn't understand was this. Being remembered isn't the same as being chosen. Just because someone comes back to you doesn't mean they value you the way you think they do. Sometimes it just means you're available. The turning point for me wasn't when she left. It was when I started paying attention to when she came back. Because it was never random. It was always when something else in her life wasn't working. when she felt bored, when she felt alone, when she needed someone to fill that gap. That's when I would hear from her again. And at first I didn't connect those dots. I just saw it as her coming back. But once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You realize you're not part of her routine. You're part of her fallback. And that changes everything. Because now it's not about misunderstanding the connection. It's about understanding your position in it. And my position was never first, never consistent, just there when she needed me. Once I accepted that, the situation stopped feeling confusing and started feeling clear. Painful, but clear, because now I understood why the connection never felt stable, why I was always questioning things, why it felt like I was holding on to something that kept slipping. It wasn't because I wasn't doing enough, it was because she was never fully in. You can't build something stable with someone who only shows up part-time. You can't create consistency with someone who treats you like an option. And I was trying to turn something temporary into something permanent. That's why it never worked. For a while I blamed myself. I thought maybe if I had pulled back sooner, maybe if I acted less available, maybe if I made her miss me more, things would have been different. But the truth is, people who see you as just in case don't suddenly turn you into a priority. They just adjust how often they come back. That's it. And once I understood that, I stopped trying to change how she saw me, because the problem wasn't what I was doing, it was how she valued me, and you can't force someone to value you correctly. That's when I had to be honest with myself. I wasn't stuck because of her. I was stuck because I kept accepting that position. I kept answering, kept showing up, kept giving her access to me whenever she decided to come back. And every time I did that, I reinforced the same thing, that I would always be there no matter how inconsistent she was. And once you allow that pattern, it becomes the expectation, not the exception. So the real shift didn't come from her changing. It came from me realizing I had to stop participating in it. Walking away from that wasn't easy, because when you've been someone's just in case for a while, it starts to feel normal. You get used to the cycle, the ups, the silence, the return. And breaking that cycle means facing something uncomfortable, that the connection you thought you had was never what you believed it was. But once you step out of it, you start seeing clearly again. You start realizing how much energy you were giving to something that wasn't giving you the same in return, and that clarity changes everything. So yeah, she kept me around just in case, and for a while I stayed because I thought being there meant something, but now I understand the difference. Being someone's option isn't the same as being someone's choice. The right person doesn't keep you on standby. They don't come and go. They don't leave you guessing about where you stand. They choose you, clearly, consistently, without hesitation. And next time, I won't stay in a position where I feel like I'm waiting to be picked, because I'm not here to be someone's just in case. I'm here to be someone's only choice. The longest time I thought she loved me, not just liked me, not just enjoyed being around me. I thought she actually loved me because she talked to me every day. She wanted to know what I was doing. She asked about my life like it mattered to her. And when someone shows you that kind of attention, it's easy to believe the feelings behind it are real. So I believed it. I believed the late night conversations meant something deeper. I believed the way she smiled when we talked meant she cared. I believed all the time we spent together was building something real. But looking back now, I think she didn't love me. I think she loved the attention. There's a difference. When someone loves you, they care about who you are, your thoughts, your struggles, your future. They care about the person standing in front of them. But when someone loves the attention, the focus isn't really on you, it's on how you make them feel, the compliments, the validation, the feeling of being wanted. And for a while I was giving her all of that. I was the person who always answered, the person who always listened, the person who always showed up when she needed someone to talk to. And I thought that meant I mattered to her, but eventually I started noticing something strange. Whenever I pulled back, she suddenly came closer. Whenever I stopped giving her attention, she started reaching out again. Not because she missed me, but because she missed the way I made her feel. And that's when something started becoming clear. Maybe she didn't love me the way I thought she did. Maybe she just loved having someone who cared about her that much. Once that thought entered my head, that maybe she didn't love me, maybe she just loved the attention, I started seeing things differently. Moments that once felt meaningful started feeling different. I remembered how often she reached out when she was bored, when she had nothing going on, when she needed someone to talk to. And every time I was there, answering her messages, listening to her problems, giving her reassurance whenever she doubted herself. At the time, I thought that's what love looked like. Two people being there for each other. But when I really looked at it honestly, something felt uneven. Because when she needed attention, I was always available. But when I needed support, it didn't always feel the same. Sometimes she would disappear. Sometimes the conversation would suddenly end. Sometimes it felt like the connection only existed when she was the one who needed it. And that's when the difficult question started forming in my mind. Was she actually interested in me? Or was she interested in the way I made her feel about herself? Because attention can be addictive. When someone constantly reminds you that you're special, that you're wanted, that someone cares deeply about you, it feels good, really good. And some people don't fall in love with the person giving them that feeling. They fall in love with the feeling itself, the validation, the reassurance, the comfort of knowing someone is always there. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with, but someone who gave her a constant source of emotional attention. And the moment I started seeing that pattern, everything began to make more sense. The more I thought about it, the more patterns started standing out. Because when someone actually loves you, their presence in your life is consistent. They don't only show up when they need something. They don't only reach out when they're bored. They don't only care when the attention is focused on them. But with her, the connection always seemed to revolve around how she felt. If she had a bad day, I was the first person she called. If she felt insecure, I was the one reminding her how amazing she was. If she needed someone to listen, I was always there. And at the time, I thought that meant I was important to her. But eventually, I noticed something uncomfortable. When I had a bad day, she wasn't always there the same way. When I needed reassurance, the conversation would shift quickly. When I tried to open up about my own struggles, it didn't always hold her attention for long. And that's when it started feeling like the relationship wasn't built around us. It was built around her receiving and me giving. And the scary part about that kind of dynamic is you don't notice it right away. Because when you care about someone, giving feels natural. You don't keep score. You don't measure every moment of effort. You just show up because you believe the connection matters. But slowly you start realizing something. You're the one holding most of the emotional weight. You're the one keeping the conversations alive. You're the one making sure the connection doesn't fade. And when you stop doing that, everything changes. That's when the real truth shows itself. Because the moment I stopped giving her constant attention, something strange happened. She didn't start fighting harder for the connection. She didn't try to understand what changed. Instead, the distance grew. And that's when I realized something that hurt more than the breakup itself. She didn't miss me. She missed the attention I gave her. Realizing that she didn't miss me, she missed the attention, was one of the hardest truths to accept. Because when you care about someone deeply, you don't want to believe that your place in their life was built around something that shallow. You want to believe the connection meant something real. that the conversations mattered, that the time you spent talking late at night actually meant you were building something. But once I started paying attention to the pattern, it became impossible to ignore. Whenever I gave her attention, everything felt great. She was warm, engaged, interested. She would laugh more, reply faster, make it seem like we had this deep connection. But the moment that attention slowed down, everything changed. Suddenly the conversations felt shorter, the interest faded, the energy shifted, and that's when it finally clicked. Her feelings weren't connected to me. They were connected to the attention I was giving her. Because when someone loves you, their connection doesn't disappear just because the attention changes. But when someone loves the attention, the moment that validation slows down, so does their interest. And looking back now, that explains everything. Why she would suddenly become distant, why she would come back the moment I stopped reaching out, why the connection always felt strongest when I was the one giving the most. It wasn't love, it was validation, and I was the person supplying it. Once I finally understood that she loved the attention more than she loved me, a lot of things started making sense. For the longest time, I kept wondering why the connection always felt unstable, why some days she seemed completely invested, and other days she felt distant, why the energy between us depended so heavily on how much I was giving. At the time, I thought that was normal. I thought relationships just had ups and downs. But there's a difference between normal ups and downs and a connection that only exists when one person is constantly feeding it. And that's what this was. Whenever I was fully present, texting first, asking about her day, complimenting her, showing that I cared, everything felt good between us. But when I pulled back even slightly, the dynamic changed immediately. The warmth disappeared, the conversation slowed down, and the connection that once felt so strong suddenly felt fragile. That's when it became impossible to ignore what was really happening. Because love doesn't disappear just because attention shifts for a moment, but validation does. Validation needs constant reinforcement. It needs someone to keep providing that feeling of being admired and wanted. And once that source slows down, the person who depended on it starts looking for it somewhere else. That's when I realized something that hurt more than I expected. I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person who made her feel important. And once you realize that difference, you start understanding the relationship in a completely different way. Once that realization settled in, that she loved the attention more than she loved me, something inside me started shifting. At first it hurt more, because it meant all the things I thought were meaningful might not have meant the same thing to her. All those long conversations, all the moments where she told me things she said she didn't tell anyone else, all the time she said she appreciated having me in her life. I thought those things meant we were building something real, but now I started seeing them through a different lens. Maybe she didn't say those things because she loved me. Maybe she said them because she loved the feeling of having someone who cared about her that much. And that's a dangerous dynamic, because when someone becomes your main source of validation, it feels powerful. You feel admired, you feel important, you feel like someone is always there to remind you that you matter. But that feeling isn't the same as love. Love cares about the person giving the attention. Validation only cares about the feeling it creates. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Whenever I tried to shift the focus of the relationship, whenever I wanted something deeper, the energy changed. If I asked serious questions about where things were going, if I talked about building something more stable, if I needed emotional support myself, that's when the connection suddenly felt weaker. Almost like the relationship only worked when I was the one giving, not when I needed something back. And that's when the truth became impossible to ignore. The relationship wasn't built on mutual connection. It was built on attention, and I was the one providing it. After I understood that the relationship was built more on attention than love, another uncomfortable truth started showing itself. I wasn't just giving attention, I was maintaining the entire connection. I was the one making sure the conversation didn't die. I was the one checking in first. I was the one asking how she was doing, making sure she felt heard, making sure she felt valued. And at the time, I didn't see that as a problem. When you care about someone, putting in effort feels natural. You don't think about it like a transaction. You think about it like loyalty. But over time, I started noticing something. The relationship only felt alive when I was feeding it. Whenever I stepped back, even a little, everything started fading. The messages slowed down. The energy dropped. The connection that once felt strong suddenly felt fragile. And that's when it hit me. Love doesn't disappear the moment someone stops giving constant attention, but validation does. Validation needs fuel. It needs someone constantly reminding you that you're wanted, that you're interesting, that someone is thinking about you. And the moment that fuel slows down, the person who depended on it starts feeling empty. That's when they either come back asking for more, or they go find someone else who will give it to them. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with. I was a source of attention, a source of validation, a source of emotional reassurance. And once you realize you were someone's source, not their choice, the whole relationship starts looking different. Once I accepted that I was just a source of attention for her, something else started becoming clear. The connection only existed when it benefited her emotionally. Whenever she needed reassurance, I was important. Whenever she felt lonely, I mattered. Whenever she needed someone to remind her that she was attractive, interesting, or worth talking to, suddenly I was the person she wanted to talk to again. But the moment she felt good again, the moment that emotional gap inside her was filled, something would change. The urgency would disappear. The replies would slow down, the energy would fade, and I would sit there wondering what I did wrong. For a long time, I blamed myself for those shifts. I thought maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I didn't keep the excitement alive. But once you understand the difference between love and attention, everything makes more sense. Love stays even when the excitement fades. Love stays even when you're not constantly entertaining someone. Love stays even when the validation slows down for a moment. But attention doesn't work like that. Attention is temporary. It's something people chase when they need to feel good about themselves. And once they get that feeling again, they don't always need the person who gave it to them anymore. Looking back, that explains why the connection always felt inconsistent. It explains why some days she felt deeply invested in us all, and other days it felt like she barely noticed I existed, because I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person she turned to whenever she needed to feel important. And once I saw that clearly, the whole relationship started making sense in a way it never had before. For a while, realizing that hurt more than anything else, because nobody wants to believe they were just someone's source of attention. You want to believe the connection meant something deeper. You want to believe the time you invested mattered in the same way for both of you. But eventually something changed in the way I saw it. I stopped feeling embarrassed about how much I cared, because caring deeply isn't the problem. The problem is giving that level of attention to someone who only values the feeling it gives them. And that's a big difference. There's nothing wrong with being loyal. There's nothing wrong with showing up for someone you care about. The mistake is believing that everyone who accepts your attention values it the same way you do. Some people appreciate attention, other people depend on it. And the people who depend on it will keep you close as long as you keep feeding that feeling inside them. But the moment the attention stops, the connection disappears, not because they suddenly stop liking you, but because the feeling they were chasing isn't coming from you anymore. And once you understand that, something inside you changes. You stop chasing people who only show up when they need something. You stop investing in connections that only exist when you're the one giving, because you realize something important. You deserve someone who values you, not just the attention you give them. Looking back now, I don't think she loved me, but I also don't think she was pretending the whole time. I think she genuinely liked how I made her feel. She liked the attention. She liked the reassurance. She liked having someone who consistently reminded her that she mattered. And for a while, that was enough to keep the connection alive. But attention alone can't build something real. Because the moment that attention stops, there's nothing holding the relationship together. And that's exactly what happened. Once I stopped constantly feeding the connection, it disappeared. At first that felt like rejection, but now I see it differently. It wasn't rejection, it was clarity, because it showed me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who only loves the feeling you give them. And once you see that difference clearly, you stop blaming yourself for the way things ended. You realize you weren't losing someone who truly valued you. You were losing someone who valued what you provided. And that's not the kind of connection worth holding on to. One day I'll meet someone who doesn't just enjoy the attention I give them. Someone who actually cares about the person giving it. Someone who chooses me even when the excitement fades. Someone who values the connection, not just the validation. And when that happens, I won't feel like I'm constantly proving my worth, because the right person doesn't stay for the attention, they stay for you. Romantic, I believe in effort, in choosing someone daily, in love that feels intentional, not accidental, but I'm not naive anymore. I don't confuse chemistry with commitment. I don't mistake words for consistency. I don't fall in love with potential and ignore reality to protect the fantasy. That version of me is gone. Being romantic doesn't mean I overlook red flags. It doesn't mean I excuse disrespect. It doesn't mean I stay just because I feel deeply. It means I love with awareness now. I still want connection, still want intimacy, still want something real, but I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my peace just to keep a feeling alive. I know the difference now between someone who feels good and someone who is good for me. I know the difference between affection and effort, between attention and intention, and I don't chase illusions anymore. I won't romanticize someone who can't show up consistently. I won't soften the truth to protect a story I wanted to believe in. I can be tender and still have boundaries, hopeful and still realistic. Romantic doesn't mean blind. It means I care deeply, but I pay attention. And this time I don't fall in love at the expense of myself. I used to think being romantic meant enduring, staying longer than I should, giving the benefit of the doubt even when doubt was all I felt, believing that love meant patience no matter the cost. That's where it went wrong. I mistook tolerance for depth. I confused hope with commitment. I kept softening my boundaries to protect a version of love that wasn't protecting me. That wasn't romance, that was self-abandonment. Being romantic doesn't mean I ignore patterns. It doesn't mean I wait for someone to become who they promise to be. It means I listen when actions contradict words. It means I leave when effort fades. It means I don't negotiate respect just to keep a connection alive. I still believe in love that's big, in feelings that are deep, in choosing someone with intention. But now, romance has standards. I won't pour into uncertainty. I won't romanticize inconsistency. I won't stay where I feel anxious and call it passion. Romantic love should feel safe enough to be honest, stable enough to be real, mutual enough to last, and if it isn't, I don't try to fix it anymore. Because I can be romantic without being reckless with my heart. Being romantic but not naive changes how you choose people from the very beginning. You don't rush connection anymore. You don't get swept up by intensity. You don't confuse attention with alignment. You let things unfold. You watch how someone shows up when it's inconvenient, how they communicate when things are unclear, how they act when they don't get their way. Because attraction is easy, consistency is not. You stop falling for the idea of someone and start paying attention to how they actually treat you. Do they follow through? Do they respect your time? Do they show curiosity about your inner world? Or just enjoy how you make them feel? Being romantic doesn't mean you stop feeling sparks. It means sparks aren't enough anymore. You want safety with the spark, effort with the chemistry, clarity with the feelings, so you slow down, not because you're scared, but because you value yourself too much to rush into something unproven. You let people reveal who they are without trying to fill in the gaps for them. And if something feels off, you don't romanticize it. You listen, because the right connection won't need you to ignore yourself to keep it alive. Being romantic without being naive means I still believe in love. I just don't chase it blindly anymore. I don't force connections. I don't convince people to choose me. I don't stay where effort feels one-sided and call it patience. I let love meet me where I am. If someone wants me, I won't have to guess. If someone cares, I won't have to ask repeatedly. If something is real, it won't require me to ignore my instincts. I still believe in late-night talks, in choosing each other, in building something meaningful, but I don't sacrifice clarity for intensity anymore. I've learned that love isn't proven by how much you're willing to endure. It's proven by how safe you feel being yourself without shrinking, performing, or waiting. So now I don't rush toward feelings just because they're strong. I let actions catch up to words. I let time reveal truth. I let consistency do the convincing. And if someone can't meet me there, I don't make it mean love is dead. I just understand that not every connection is meant to last. I can still be soft, still hopeful, still romantic. I'm just no longer willing to lose myself for the sake of a feeling. Being romantic, not naive, changed what I tolerate. I don't excuse inconsistency anymore. I don't sit with confusion and call it giving things time. I don't ignore the feeling that something is off just because I want it to work. Before, I'd stay and explain. I'd adjust. I'd wait. Now, I observe. If effort fades, I notice. If respect slips, I address it once. If nothing changes, I leave. Not angrily, not dramatically, just clearly. I don't feel guilty walking away from things that don't align anymore, because walking away isn't punishment, it's protection. I used to think romance meant holding on. Now I know it also means knowing when to let go. I still care deeply, still feel intensely, still believe in choosing someone with intention, but I won't romanticize potential at the expense of reality. I won't stay where I feel anxious, unseen, or unsure of my place. Romance without boundaries is just hope with no direction. And now, my heart has standards, not walls, standards. Being romantic and grounded makes love feel quieter than I expected. There's no chaos, no guessing games, no emotional roller coaster disguised as passion. And at first that felt strange. I was used to intensity proving something, used to anxiety meaning I cared, used to confusion keeping me invested. But that wasn't depth, that was instability. Now, romance feels calm. It looks like consistency. It sounds like clear communication. It feels like not having to overthink where I stand. There's still excitement. It's just not fueled by uncertainty. I don't need constant reassurance anymore. I don't need dramatic gesture to feel chosen. I don't need to be chased to feel wanted. Because when something is real, it doesn't keep you on edge. Being romantic doesn't mean I crave fireworks every moment. It means I value safety with the spark, peace with the passion, connection that doesn't cost me my balance. And the biggest shift, I don't mistake calm for boredom anymore. I understand now that love doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. Sometimes the most romantic thing is feeling secure enough to just be yourself. Being romantic, not naive, changed how I communicate my needs. I don't hint anymore. I don't water things down to avoid being too much. I don't stay silent hoping someone will just figure it out. I say what I need, not aggressively, not defensively, just honestly, because needing clarity isn't pressure. Needing consistency isn't insecurity. Needing effort isn't asking for the world, it's asking for alignment. Before, I was scared that speaking up would push people away, that if I asked for more, I'd lose what I had. Now I understand something important. If honesty scares someone off, they were never meant to stay. I don't over-explain myself anymore. I don't apologize for having standards. I don't negotiate my needs to make someone comfortable. Romance doesn't mean silence. It means trusting that the right person won't feel threatened by clear communication. They won't call it drama. They won't call it too much. They won't make you feel guilty for wanting to feel secure. They'll listen, they'll respond, they'll meet you where you are. And if they don't, I don't take it personally, because being romantic, not naive, means I'd rather be understood slowly than misunderstood forever. Being romantic with boundaries filters people out quietly. You don't have to test anyone, you don't have to interrogate intentions, you don't have to force clarity. You just stay consistent with who you are, you show up honestly, you communicate clearly. You don't overgive to keep someone interested, and that alone does the work. People who only wanted attention get bored. People who thrived on ambiguity get uncomfortable. People who wanted access without effort slowly fade, and you let them, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped chasing. Being romantic, not naive, means you don't audition for love anymore. You don't prove your worth. You don't compete for consistency. You don't bend yourself to be easier to choose. You let people meet you where you stand, and the ones who can't, they remove themselves. That used to scare you. Now it reassures you, because the right connection won't need you to lower your standards to keep it alive. It will rise to meet them. And the most romantic thing about that, you don't have to lose yourself to find love anymore. I still believe in love. That part never left. What changed is who I trust first. I believe in myself now. I trust my intuition when something feels off. I trust my boundaries when they need to be held. I trust my heart without handing it over blindly. Before, I believed love required risk at any cost, that you had to jump first and hope someone caught you. Now I know better. Real love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. It doesn't punish you for being honest. It doesn't require you to doubt your worth to keep it alive. Being romantic, not naive, means I still dream. I just don't disappear into the dream. I don't ignore red flags to protect the fantasy. I don't silence my needs to keep someone comfortable. I don't romanticize suffering and call it devotion. I let love add to my life, not destabilize it. And the biggest shift of all, I don't fear losing love anymore the way I used to, because I know I won't lose myself trying to keep it. That confidence didn't come from love finding me. It came from me finally standing with myself. Being romantic, not naive, means I didn't lose my softness. I refined it. I still believe in love that's intentional, in effort that's mutual, in choosing someone without hesitation or games, but I no longer confuse love with endurance. I won't stay where I feel uncertain. I won't fight for clarity. I won't romanticize someone's potential while ignoring how they treat me now. Romance isn't blind faith anymore. It's awareness. It's knowing that feelings matter, but actions matter more. That chemistry is exciting, but consistency is what lasts. That love shouldn't cost you your peace, your voice, or yourself. I still want something real. I still want depth. I still want connection that feels meaningful. I just won't abandon myself to get it. If someone meets me with honesty, I open my heart. If they meet me with effort, I lean in. If they meet me halfway, I walk the rest with them. And if they don't, I don't force it. I don't chase it. I don't grieve what was never aligned. Because being romantic doesn't mean I accept less. It means I know exactly what kind of love I want. And I'm patient enough to wait for something that doesn't ask me to be smaller, quieter, or less aware. I'm still a romantic. I just finally learned how to protect my heart without closing it. And that's the difference.